The black-haired girl had only just managed to open her eyes when the ceiling of the orphanage attic came into view. For young Aira, this was the beginning of yet another difficult day in this far from pleasant place. She took off her sleepwear, which was at least still in decent condition, and changed into her worn, everyday dress. She found herself thinking that, old as it was, at least it was still wearable. As usual, her day began with preparing breakfast for all the children in the orphanage. Rita was utterly sick of it all. Back when everyone still took turns cooking, she had often been so tired she would nearly fall asleep while walking. But now, the responsibility had fallen entirely onto her frail shoulders. Yawning, the girl sadly thought about her life. If she could at least eat the food she made herself, perhaps the sense of unfairness would not feel so overwhelming. A gray-haired man with a vicious expression passed by and said something in a mocking tone. He asked Rita whether she had served herself too much again, even more than usual, then immediately told her to hurry up and sit down to eat. The girl started looking for an empty seat among the other children, who were already sitting together, happily chatting. She finally found a place for herself and quickly finished her small portion of food, but her hunger did not go away. As Rita was heading toward the exit, the vicious man blocked her path once again and began loudly scolding her. He ordered her to clean up the mess everyone else had left behind now that she was done eating. The girl could not argue with him because he was the director of this orphanage. She only lowered her eyes sadly and agreed. Her next task was cleaning the dining hall after breakfast, and days like this had long since become her everyday life. Whenever this happened, she felt unbearably sad and wrong. Trembling, she recalled the days when people used to call her Little Aira. A year ago, the girl had been in an accident in Korea, and when she woke up, she had found herself in this body. She quickly realized that this was the world of a short story she had once read. She was terrified of being in this body because she could imagine the kind of fate that might be waiting for her. Right now, she was nothing more than a side character. Her new name was Rita. She knew the plot of the novel well, and fortunately, the story would not truly begin until 10 years later. But even so, what difference did that make? She was not even the protagonist. As the girl went about her usual chores and work, a female voice called out to her, addressing her as Black Hair. Rita recognized the voice. It was Lily. She did not answer the girl, only wondered what she wanted this time. Wearing a stern expression, Lily announced that someone had called for her to come to the director's office. Those words frightened the girl somewhat. She was surprised because she had never been called to the director's office before and had no idea why children were summoned there. The moment poor Aira dared to ask her a question, Lily immediately lunged at her in anger. She screeched, calling her a filthy black-haired girl who really thought she was something, and then strode out of the room where Rita was standing. The girl was not shocked. She was already used to Lily acting like this. She simply thought, how awful of a person is she? Is it really that impossible for her to treat everyone normally? Rita walked to the director's office, lightly knocked on the door, and softly asked for permission to enter. At first she said she was Rita, then added, Black Hair. The man opened the door. The moment he saw the girl, he was, as expected, in one of his usual rages. He said he would not listen to her name anymore and called her Black Hair once again. Rita wanted to protest, though she knew it was pointless. She was just about to say that that was what it said in the documents, but the man did not even give the little girl a chance to finish. He ordered her to shut up and go to the market to buy ingredients. She asked whether it was not supposed to be Lily's turn today, and the director roared at her again, saying she had no right to talk back. He added that Lily was going with him to buy new clothes today, so the decision was not up for debate. He kept yelling and even added that, in any case, the girl had not been doing anything in the first place. Rita clenched her fists at the unfairness, but she could not say a word. Hearing that was deeply humiliating when almost all the work in the orphanage was done by her. But whether in Korea or here, her situation had not changed at all. The unfairness made her furious, yet she did not have the courage to run away. All she did was sit alone in her room every night and cry quietly so no one would hear. After all, if she were caught trying to escape, she would surely be locked in the storage room for an entire week. And everyone here avoided black-haired people, so no matter where Rita went, she would never be welcome. In a situation like this, it was hard to come up with any solution. And so, she arrived at the town market to buy food. Whenever she was in crowded places, the girl always wore a hooded cloak to hide her black hair. In the market, she looked around cautiously. Vendors loudly called out about fresh fish, delicious baked treats, and all sorts of things they were selling. Since the weather was nice that day, Rita decided to walk around a little. But just as she was about to move forward, she suddenly stopped and narrowed her eyes, as if something were hindering her. Walking in these pathetically small shoes was extremely uncomfortable and even painful. Just then, someone suddenly shouted, "Oh, look, it's that damn black-haired girl." At last, someone had noticed the strand of black hair peeking out from under her hood. She could hear everyone around her talking about her, and of course it felt awful. She could not even quietly buy some vegetables in peace. People said she was a bad omen, that business had been going badly since early morning because of this girl. They believed she brought nothing but misfortune. She finally reached the vegetable stall she had come for, politely greeted them, and said she was there to pick up some ingredients. The young man smiled and asked why Rita had come to buy vegetables again today, and she answered that Lily had gone with the director to buy new clothes. The young man looked puzzled. He said that, in his opinion, the one who clearly needed new clothes more than Lily was Rita. The girl herself obviously knew that too, but she did not respond. The young man went to prepare what she needed and also gave her something to eat, saying his wife had especially asked him to pass it on to Rita. Mrs. Megan had repeatedly reminded her husband about it. The girl was overjoyed because kindness like this toward her was so rare, and the plum in her hand practically sparkled in the sunlight. She began to eat, while the vendor worried that the bundle might be a little heavy this time and wondered whether Rita could carry it by herself. She answered that she would definitely be fine. The man patted the girl on the head and added that if she wanted more plums, she should feel free to come and get them without being shy, because he would always save some for Rita. The walk back took longer than the girl had expected, so she started hurrying in order not to be late getting back to the orphanage. She was terribly afraid of being late, because the director's punishments were always severe. She rushed along so quickly that she did not notice the person in front of her at all. The two collided, and Rita fell to the ground, the contents of the bundle scattering all over the street. She hurriedly got to her feet and apologized for what had happened, but what frightened her more was that now she would definitely be late. But to the girl's surprise, the man she had bumped into began helping her pick up the food that had fallen to the ground. She froze at the gesture, hardly able to believe that someone in the street would help a black-haired girl like her. Once she had calmed down a little, she remained sitting on the ground, staring at the young man, but he was also wearing a hood, so she could not see his face. Rita thanked him, and he held out his hand to help her up. He asked where she lived, guessing it was probably nearby, but the girl replied that she lived at Lezen Orphanage, which was far from here. The young man was surprised to hear that, and the girl quickly added that she had to go, or she might get into trouble. After that exchange, the girl thanked him several more times for helping her, because his attitude had surprised her so much. Just as she turned to head back toward the orphanage, the young man called out to her. He asked the girl what her name was, and she answered that her name was Rita, but that she had no surname, only Rita. "All right, Rita, be careful on your way back." He spoke in a mysterious voice, yet remained standing there without leaving. He watched the girl leave, and only when she had gone far enough did he say, "I will come for you very soon, my daughter." Then he called out the name Kyle, and that man was already standing behind him. He told the second man that they had to go to Lezen Orphanage tomorrow. He had clearly sensed certain things in this girl: violet eyes, an astonishing magical power emanating from the deepest essence of this little child. He also said that although finding her had not been easy, he realized at once that this girl was his lost daughter. In response, Kyle said that he would make preparations immediately. Tattered clothes, ill-fitting shoes, hands covered in calluses, a hunched, frightened figure. These thoughts tormented the Grand Duke without end. He was furious. While he had been desperately searching for his lost daughter, she had been suffering such horrible treatment all this time, and he would never let it go unanswered. "My dear daughter, I will bring you home very soon," he said firmly, his gaze fixed on the distance. After returning to the orphanage, Rita immediately went to bed because she had worked all day and was simply too exhausted. But all of this was far too heavy a burden for a child. Sometimes she dreamed of her previous life, and Rita would often wake with tears in her eyes. She dreamed of a young couple standing in front of her, thinking that this child seemed a little different from the one in the photograph. They said the girl looked too gloomy and ultimately concluded that she probably was not suitable for them. The orphanage director said she was completely useless. He also said she almost always looked sullen. He clearly disliked that about her very much. He even said that no one would ever love her. Because of this, Rita kept wondering whether there truly was not a single person in this world who could accept and love a child like her. Thinking about that made the girl unbearably sad and disappointed. If the God who had sent her here really existed, then from the bottom of her heart, she prayed, "Please, don't leave me alone anymore." This was her only wish and her most precious one. The next morning, she woke up already exhausted. Perhaps it was because of the dream she had the night before. The girl entered the common room and heard the other children excitedly discussing something. They said it seemed someone was coming, and they made all sorts of guesses, but no one knew who the visitor actually was. And just then, the heroine was noticed by Lily again. Full of hostility, Lily remarked that Rita was actually planning to greet a noble in such a miserable state. Rita was surprised that a noble would come to visit them, and Lily confirmed that this was what the director had told them. Lily added that she did not want to hide the truth, so Rita had better not get her hopes up. She said the heroine would stay here forever, because no one would ever want to adopt a damned black-haired girl like her as a daughter. Words like that hurt the girl as they always did, but she still tried hard to suppress her feelings and not let them show. Yet even so, the director's words, "No one will love her," kept circling in her mind. Lily went on mocking her. She told Rita not to worry, because once she became a nobleman's wife, she would toss this pitiful girl a few coins. Of course, Rita did not respond to Lily's sharp and malicious words. She merely thought to herself that this was happening again. Over the past few years, people had often come to the orphanage wanting to adopt a child, yet every time she could do nothing but watch from the attic. And all of it was because of her black hair. Everyone kept saying that having a black-haired girl in the orphanage meant misfortune. So once again, she watched everything unfolding outside from the attic window when she suddenly realized that the black carriage from the novel was heading toward the orphanage. If the visitors had come in that carriage, then there was a chance they were characters from the original story. The director stepped forward to greet them and told the young man that they had been waiting for him for a long time. The other man replied that his name was Fane, that he had already sent the director a letter yesterday, and that the Count was inside the carriage. He could not say that it was actually the Grand Duke. The director was quite startled when he heard the word Count, but how shocked would he have been if he had known the man's true identity? The man thought to himself that this fellow reeked of money. The director had already had a favorable impression of him, and now he turned out to be a count as well. The director felt that today was truly his lucky day. Fane asked whether all the children were there, looking at the happy, laughing boys and girls. To this, the director confidently replied that all the children in the orphanage were present. Then, a moment later, the Grand Duke stepped out of the carriage and, in an even colder, sterner voice, asked whether the director was lying to him. A trace of fear appeared on the director's face, but he still forced himself not to back down, insisting that all the children were here and even arguing that he could not possibly deceive a count. If that is so, then who is the child sitting in the attic? The Grand Duke asked, fixing the director with icy, furious eyes. At that moment, their gazes met. Irita and the Grand Duke looked at each other for a moment. The girl was simply stunned and had no time to hide as she usually would. The director began defending himself. He said the girl had black hair and was cursed, which was why he had locked her away in the attic. When the Count told him to bring the girl down to meet them, the director was taken aback. He began to worry because he did not know how others might interpret his intentions. The director stood there hesitating for a moment, wondering what to do. The Grand Duke immediately grew irritated, stepped closer, repeated his order, and asked whether the man was incapable of hearing. A few minutes later, the girl finally came downstairs and knocked on the office door. She said the visitor was Irita, even though that man normally never allowed her to give her own name. But this time, the door was opened. The moment the girl said her name, she herself did not understand what was happening and felt deeply uneasy. She recognized the person sitting before her as the very man she had seen from the attic window. Irita was terribly nervous. She was certain she was about to be scolded again. Fane immediately bent down, introduced himself to her, and addressed Irita as young miss. Confused, she repeated that her name was Irita, and the man replied that he was pleased to meet her, then asked how she usually spent her days there. She told him that she usually helped with cleaning and cooking, and when she had free time, she went up to the attic. Fane was clearly shocked that such a small girl was made to cook for herself. But then the director cut in and said that the idea of a child, not even 10 years old, cooking by herself was utterly ridiculous. The Grand Duke walked over to the heroine and told the girl to come with him. He promised her that from now on, she would never have to cook again, nor live under someone else's constant surveillance. He held out his hand to the girl, but the little girl could not believe she was truly allowed to do that. "Of course you can," the Grand Duke answered, continuing to look at Irita, his eyes full of anticipation and tenderness. But the girl sadly said she did not believe him, because she was not pretty and had cursed black hair. Yet the man replied that it did not matter in the slightest. He also said that, to him, she was the most beautiful of all. The girl was utterly astonished that someone who had only just met her would say such gentle words. No one had ever said those things to her before, not even in her previous life. It was enough to bring tears to her eyes. He asked once more whether Irita was willing to go with him, and the girl reached out her hand in agreement. The director once again tried to interfere in the conversation. He stopped the count and asked again whether he really intended to take this girl away. The Grand Duke rose to his feet, pulled Irita tightly into his arms, and firmly shielded her in front of him. He asked the director if there was a problem. The director immediately began flattering him, saying there were many other lovely children in the orphanage and that they could certainly look at others instead, while once again emphasizing that this girl had cursed black hair. The director simply could not understand why, out of all the children, he had chosen Irita. What he was really worried about was who would cook and clean there in the future if the girl was taken away. Fane cut off his thoughts and asked why all the other children were dressed in new clothes while only Irita wore ragged scraps. The man became somewhat flustered, but said it was because the orphanage was in financial difficulty and they had no choice. Fane began flipping through some documents and read their contents aloud. Embezzling donations from the parish's believers, diverting charitable funds for private use. Fane added that now he finally understood why this shelter was suffering from financial hardship. The Grand Duke asked Fane what kind of punishment such conduct usually deserved. Fane replied that, at the very least, the director should be removed from his post, have all his property confiscated, and be exiled. The director shouted that the Count could not do this to him, especially not just for that cursed little bastard, that is Irita. But in the next second, the edge of a sword was already pressed against the director's throat, and Fane reminded him to watch his mouth, saying that the only reason he was still breathing was because there was a young miss in the room. The Grand Duke ordered the director to be taken away. The little girl still stood there looking bewildered. Then they headed toward the carriage. The Grand Duke held the child in his arms, and from the distance the director's cries could still be heard as he begged to be spared. The man asked Irita whether there was anything she wanted to take from the shelter. She answered that she had nothing there at all. She only wanted to leave. The Grand Duke nodded and said that once they arrived home, the girl would have everything she wanted. Hearing the word home, Irita asked again in surprise. This sudden change also frightened her somewhat. "Yes, home," the Grand Duke answered. As he looked at the girl, his eyes gleamed with happiness. At last, that brief moment of peace arrived. Her heartbeat was no longer racing as wildly as before. Calmly, they set out on the road home. Everyone boarded the carriage, and it began heading toward the Grand Duke's residence. For a long while, the inside of the carriage was completely quiet. No one said a word. Irita did not know what to do. She even began to feel that none of this was right, that things should not be happening this way. She felt extremely uncomfortable sitting on the Grand Duke's lap. She thought how shameful it was for a girl as insignificant as herself to be sitting beside a man like him. She had long been deeply indoctrinated with the belief that she was worthless, and because of her hair color she had been treated as someone cursed. And unfortunately, all she could do now was keep crying, which made her feel even more ashamed. Then another thought came to her. After some time, would the Grand Duke decide to send her back? And if that happened, how would the children at the orphanage treat her? Surely it would only be worse than before. But just then, the man removed the hood of his cloak, and Irita saw before her a handsome man with beautiful eyes. More shocking still, he too had black hair. So surprised that she could not help herself, she asked whether his black hair was real. The Grand Duke answered with certainty that it was. Then he began telling Irita that he had once had a lovely daughter, a child he had sworn to cherish and protect forever. But 7 years ago, he lost both his wife and daughter in an accident. His wife died on the spot, while his daughter was declared missing. missing. Since then, the Grand Duke had been searching everywhere for that black-haired girl, his daughter. Only then did Irita understand why he had decided to adopt her, but she still said regretfully that she was not his daughter. The man knelt on one knee before the little girl and asked why she would think that, because he was certain the truth was exactly the opposite. It turned out the director had once told the girl that she was the daughter of a maid. The man immediately said that was absolutely impossible, that it could never be true. After all, this girl had bright violet eyes like violets and the same black hair as the Grand Duke. Moreover, he could also sense the magic surrounding Irita. He went on to say that the girl was not called Irita, but Erida Crovahearts. She was also his daughter, the daughter of Aslan Crovahearts, the only young lady of House Crovahearts. He added that at the orphanage earlier, he had called himself a count only to conceal his true identity. Aslan Crovahearts, the founding hero of the Helzang Empire, the man who had earned the title of Grand Duke through his glorious military achievements, was also the villain from the novel little Aira had read in her previous life. And now, this man was her father. The girl simply could not believe it. She had thought that being able to leave the orphanage was already an immense blessing. But now, she had even gained a real family. Erida could not imagine how she was supposed to believe any of this, much less believe that her father of all people was a villain. By all logic, she should not have felt joy in a situation like this. So why, then, were tears of happiness welling up in her eyes? She asked the Grand Duke whether she truly had family now. The Grand Duke answered her firmly that she did. Erida thought that these tears were probably because for the first time in her life, she finally had a real family. They embraced, and the Grand Duke apologized to his beloved daughter for taking so long to find her. And now, for some reason, the girl only wanted to nestle even closer against him, against her father. But by then, they had already arrived at the palace. Waiting at the entrance to receive them was a butler who bowed respectfully, and Aslan immediately asked him about Erida's room. The girl's room had already been prepared, and the butler had also arranged a reliable maid for her, since they did not intend to stay there long. The butler had not gone to great lengths over the formalities. To this, the Grand Duke replied that this was perfectly fine, and that they would soon return to the estate. The butler wished the Grand Duke and the girl a pleasant rest, then withdrew. Aslan stood by the child's bed for a long time, watching over her as she fell peacefully asleep. He sat beside the bed for quite some time, gently holding his daughter's hand. The ragged clothes Irita had been wearing would not leave his mind, nor could he forget the calm way she had spoken of the labor forced onto her shoulders. Thinking of all this, the man felt that even tearing those people apart would still not be enough to repay their sins. After a while, a young man came to the Grand Duke's side and reported that Fane had already been taken to the basement. The man was somewhat surprised that it had been handled so quickly, but the aide added that both private matters and paperwork had already been taken care of. The Grand Duke thanked the young man, and the two of them went to the basement together. The moment he entered, the Grand Duke immediately called Fane's name. Fane slowly turned around, glanced at them, and remarked that they had arrived rather quickly. After exchanging greetings, the Grand Duke asked whether what needed to be done had already begun. Fane answered that it had not. Behind him sat a man with a rope sack over his head. Fane added that the sight was truly laughable, because even though not a finger had yet been laid on him, he was already trembling uncontrollably. The Grand Duke asked that, when he had treated the little girl so brutally earlier, he had not looked like this. So if it had still done nothing to him now, what exactly was he trembling for? A voice came from inside the sack, asking who these people were and what they intended to do to him. Fane immediately told him to show some respect, because a man like him did not even deserve to look the Grand Duke in the eye. Aslan agreed, and added that this was true, because the director was a completely worthless piece of trash, so worthless that he could barely suppress the urge to cut off his head on the spot. At that moment, he already had his sword in hand, and the director screamed in terror. But Aslan merely cut the rope tightened around his neck, and the sack immediately fell to the ground. The Grand Duke began the conversation with a question. 7 years ago, the director had brought a 2-year-old child into the orphanage. Her name was Irita. Did the director remember who had brought her there? But he could not answer anything at all. He only saw the men's blood-red eyes and realized that the person before him was that count from earlier. Then, noticing the Grand Duke's hair color, the director guessed that he was probably the father of that black-haired girl. He began begging for mercy, but the Grand Duke had no need for that kind of hollow apology. An apology spoken under threat of death meant nothing at all. Aslan immediately pressed the edge of his sword against the orphanage director's throat and asked what meaning those hollow apologies had. In a trembling voice, the director said that he truly wanted to apologize to Irida. The Grand Duke seized the man's face in one hand and asked again. He ordered him not to utter his daughter's name with that filthy mouth. Fane sensed a fluctuation of magic and began to worry that Aslan might cross the line, so he called out to stop him and tried to intervene. The Grand Duke's hand had already reached toward the director as he asked whether he still did not intend to speak. The man dropped to his knees with a thud and said he would talk, that he would confess everything. It was in the winter 7 years ago that the girl was brought to the shelter, but when he got that far, he hesitated again, as if unwilling to continue. The Grand Duke looked at him coldly, waiting for him to go on. Meanwhile, Irida was asleep in her room, but this time her sleep was no peaceful one either. She dreamed that she had become all alone again. There was nothing around her but endless emptiness and darkness. How pitiful, the little girl thought. She began to hear voices, constantly telling her, "How could anyone be as useless as you? You are gloomy and insignificant, which is why you were abandoned." She began to cry and scream, covering her ears with both hands and squeezing her eyes shut. The girl begged them to stop saying such things. But then, from far away, she gradually heard the Grand Duke's voice calling her name. "Irida, my daughter." She heard that voice coming from all directions, and that space gradually began to fill with color. It was as though that voice was guiding her, step by step, out of the darkness and gloom. She suddenly opened her eyes and saw her father standing right in front of her. She addressed him as my lord. But judging from the man's reaction, he did not seem to like that title very much. The Grand Duke frowned, and the girl immediately realized she had said the wrong thing. So she quickly corrected herself, looked into his eyes with a smile, and said, "Dad." Her eyes sparkled, and her cheeks flushed with shyness. It's me." Her father smiled back at her as well. He was happy that the girl was now by his side, finally awake and well-rested. By the time Irida left the room, the table was already covered with food. The Grand Duke did not know what she would like, so he had many different dishes prepared. He told her she did not have to finish everything and only needed to eat whatever she wanted. "It's too much," the little girl replied. Her eyes were full of surprise, because back at the orphanage cafeteria, she had always been forbidden from taking too much food. Irida normally would not eat this much, but the Grand Duke said that since today was her first day here, he wanted to make it a memorable one for his daughter. He added that the servants would eat as well, so she did not need to worry. Irida stared at him with wide eyes and thought he was clearly a villain in the novel. But right now, he did not look like one at all. Right now, he was simply a father doing everything he could to please his daughter. The girl gently tugged at his sleeve, trying to get his attention, because he was somewhat distracted, checking whether all the dishes had been properly set out. Turning to him, she called him Dad, and then asked him to eat with her. The man smiled. He had not expected such a request, so he gladly agreed. So they sat side by side at the large dining table and began to eat. After dinner, the Grand Duke handed dessert to the girl and gently called his daughter Little Miss. She merely stared at the plate of dessert in front of her for a long while, because at the orphanage, they had not even been allowed a single taste of such things. The Grand Duke hoped Rita would like the treat, since all children like sweets. He said that what he loved most was seeing a smile on his daughter's face, and that everything here belonged to her, so she could take whatever she wanted. In her previous life, she had rarely had the chance to eat cake. Now, she decided to try a small piece first. And though this was not the first time in this life either, she suddenly realized just how much she liked sweets. When the heroine tasted something delicious, she felt that maybe her life could become as sweet as this dessert too. After just one bite, the heroine happily exclaimed that the cake was delicious. The Grand Duke watched her with a smile, then reached out and gently wiped the cream from her cheek, because the little girl had been so absorbed in eating her dessert that she had not even noticed she had gotten cream on her face. The Grand Duke noticed that this child really did resemble Sarabia. She had loved sweets too. The girl's eyes widened. She wanted to know who her father was talking about. Sarabia Crova Hearts, the second daughter of Marquis Vicente, was Aslan's wife and Rita's mother, the only woman who had ever fallen in love with that rough and cruel Grand Duke. He began telling the girl that Sarabia was her mother. She had loved sweets so much that she would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to sneak some for herself. Rita listened intently to every word. Suddenly, she felt something strange in her heart, perhaps because this was the first time she had ever said the word word, Mom. Deeply interested, the little girl began asking her father what kind of person her mother had been, to which he replied that she had been very kind and very caring. He also said that unlike himself, Sarabia knew how to share other people's burdens. She had also been stunningly beautiful and full of charm. She was never stingy with her love. Everyone adored her. Even now, as if she were truly standing before him, the Grand Duke still remembered her gentle, radiant smile, a smile that had always made him feel safe and at peace. Only when she saw her father's expression did the girl understand what kind of person Sarabia must have been. The emotions on his face could not possibly be fake. Every word he was saying now was completely sincere. The tenderness in his eyes as he narrowed them slightly, the tone of his voice when he spoke of her smile. She must have been beautiful, Rita thought. Just as her father had said, Sarabia had clearly loved her daughter with all her heart. After night fell, Aslan brought his daughter back to her room. He wished her sweet dreams and told her that if she needed anything, she should call for him right away. The girl smiled happily. She was glad that everyone was taking such good care of her. She also said good night to her father, then lay down on the bed, though she could not fall asleep immediately. She wanted to treasure every minute she spent here. In just a single day, so many things had changed. She had even learned for the first time what a hot bath was. And for the first time, she learned what it felt like to sleep in a soft bed instead of on the freezing attic floor. She also thought of her father, Aslan, the blood drinker. Unlike the novel's description of him reeking of blood, the real man carried only a pleasant scent. She could not help wondering whether something had happened that made him become like that in the end. And in the original story, there had been another villain besides him. According to the plot, after arriving at the Grand Duke's estate, she should have met her brother. Her father had told her, "You may not remember him, but he has always cared about you very much." And now, she even knew his name, Island Crovahearts. In the original story, he was the villain who died together with Aslan. And now, the girl had taken over the body of the youngest daughter of this family. Rita still lay there quietly. She even raised a hand and looked at it, trying to confirm whether all of this was really a dream. She had thought she was only a nameless extra who had never even appeared in the novel. But now it seemed she really was the long-lost daughter of the Crovahearts family. This was practically something out of melodrama, the little girl thought. A year ago, when she entered Rita's body, she had been so weak that she could not even walk. The staff locked her in a storeroom, and that child survived on nothing but bread and water. The only reason she had managed to stay alive was because she carried memories of her previous life. But in the original story, Rita was supposed to die. Perhaps that was why the father in the story had become a villain. The little girl clenched her fists and kept telling herself that she had never been abandoned, and that she had always been the most beloved child in the family. She did not know why she had become the heroine of this story, but one thing was certain: her existence had already changed the original plot. Since that was the case, the girl firmly resolved to change it even more. She wanted to make sure that both her father and her brother would be happy in the future. The next morning, the maid marveled at how lovely little Miss looked in her new dress. The dress suited her tiny frame perfectly, and the color matched her eyes beautifully. The maid then handed Rita another dress, saying she was sure that color would look lovely on her too. The girl happily replied that she would try that one on soon as well, but the maid kept enthusiastically recommending one style after another. She wanted the little girl to try on every beautiful and expensive outfit. Rita was almost made dizzy by such enthusiasm and hurriedly asked Mary to stop. The girl's father walked into the room. He looked absolutely dazzling. His green formal attire, set with precious gemstones, matched his black hair perfectly. The girl immediately apologized for making him wait. The Grand Duke pulled the girl into his arms and gently reminded her that he had said she should not run around here because it was dangerous. But the girl had only wanted to get to him as quickly as possible. The man nodded and suggested that they set out. It seemed the awkwardness between them was gradually disappearing, perhaps because they had spent so much time together over the past few days. The Grand Duke looked carefully at the girl and asked what she was thinking about. She put on a pitiful expression and said there was something she was curious about. Rita asked when they would be able to go to the territory. The Grand Duke answered that he did not know the exact date, then calmly continued drinking his tea and added that when they went would depend entirely on Rita. This answer surprised the heroine, but it also made her happy because she finally had a choice now, and people actually asked for her opinion. The Grand Duke stood up and walked over to the girl. He said that if she wanted to go today, then that would be fine too. In response, the little girl said that she really did want to go today. The Grand Duke crouched down in front of her and asked whether she was truly sure, because the Grand Duke's territory would be a completely unfamiliar place to her. But she replied that it was all right, that she would not be afraid anymore, and then asked her father whether he would stay by her side when the time came. "Of course," Aslan replied. "I will always be on your side." Gentle, satisfied smiles appeared on both their faces. Before leaving, however, Rita asked them to stop by one place first. She wanted to see the merchants who had sold her food at the market. At that time, they had been the only ones who treated her kindly and always gave her little snacks to eat. The woman said she had already heard the news that Rita had been adopted, but she had been worried that something might have gone wrong. The girl reassured her that everything was fine now and promised to come visit them again after some time. The woman was simply happy from the bottom of her heart that Rita was safe and healthy. She also asked the girl how things were in her new home and whether she liked it there. As they walked toward the grocery shop, the girl happily told her father about these people. Uncle Philip and Mrs. Megan had always been kind to her, and they had never treated her differently because of her black hair. That was why the heroine had wanted to say goodbye to them before setting out. The Grand Duke understood that they truly were good people, so he supported his daughter and said that saying farewell to them had been the right decision. Philip and Megan wished the little girl would always remain as strong as she was now, and they also hoped that everything would go smoothly for her in the future. After the girl finished saying goodbye, the man took her into his arms and suggested that they should go. She smiled because she could feel the warmth of her father's embrace, and to her, that warmth already felt like a real family. The first year after the girl entered this body had truly been very hard, but now she could finally be happy, even if it was only a little. The Grand Duke took his daughter's hand and asked whether she was ready, then said they would be leaving from the back garden. Irita was a little curious how long the journey would take. It seemed the Grand Duke's territory was quite far from the capital. The man calmly told the girl not to worry about the trip and added that Rita would be going with someone she was already very familiar with. She would be traveling with Fane, and Fane was already waiting for them in the back garden. When they approached, Fane said everything was ready. Even though there had been so little time, and it had not been easy to prepare, he had still managed it. To that, Aslan replied that this was exactly why he was his right-hand man. The girl started hiding behind her father. She was a little shy, but Fane smiled and held out a hand to her, addressing her as Little Miss. He knelt on one knee before the heroine and said that he could finally introduce himself properly. He said his name was Fane Eilish, the Grand Duke's chief aide. The girl began worrying about him kneeling like that in front of her, since the ground here was dirty. In response, he said that this was formal etiquette, so the proper rules had to be followed. He also praised Little Miss for being truly kind-hearted. After standing up, the man told the girl that it was time for them to depart. The little girl asked where the carriage was, and the two men exchanged a look. The Grand Duke held out his hands to the girl and said that he had forgotten to explain something first. Actually, they would be traveling by teleportation magic. If they went by carriage, it would take a full month. Irita was astonished that magic could cover such a great distance, and the Grand Duke answered that ordinary mages naturally could not do that. But for Fane, it was not difficult at all, though he did need a little assistance. He had to wear a necklace that enhanced magical power. He warned the girl that she might feel a little dizzy, but that she should close her eyes anyway. The Grand Duke added that if she was afraid, she only needed to hold his hand tightly, and he would stay by her side the whole time. Fane began chanting a spell in an unfamiliar language, and at once the space around them was swallowed by a whirl of blue energy. There was no other choice now. She could only close her eyes. And just like that, they arrived. Fane understood that the little girl might be a little shocked, especially since this was her first time experiencing teleportation magic in person. It was simply incredible that they had reached their destination so quickly. "Welcome home, Irita," her father said. When they entered the mansion, the maids were already standing at the entrance, bowing respectfully as they welcomed the Grand Duke and his daughter. The little girl was very worried because there were so many people around her, and the way every one of them treated her was completely different from what she had experienced in the orphanage and in her previous life. She could hardly believe that all of this was really happening to her in the real world. She told her father that she was very excited because so many people were greeting her. Seeing that the child was uncomfortable, Aslan told the maids to return to their respective places. The women immediately began carrying out the Grand Duke's order. Just then, the girl heard a familiar male voice call out to her, somewhat nervously. "Little Miss, we meet again. Welcome home," the butler said, bowing to her. The girl thought for a moment about who he was, then suddenly cried out. It was the butler. She had seen him not long ago at another residence. But surprisingly, he had arrived here even before they did. He replied that a servant must never arrive later than his master. Mary had arrived as well and had already prepared Irita's room. Aslan asked the butler whether everything was ready, and he immediately answered yes and offered to take them to the room at once. Her father asked the girl whether she wanted to go see her room, though in general, she could go anywhere she liked. The little girl's eyes immediately lit up. She could not wait to see her new room. When they arrived, the Grand Duke opened the door and said, "Come in. This used to be your room." The girl stood there for a while, carefully taking in everything around her. She was both surprised and happy. The room looked like the princess's bedchamber she had once read about in books. Irita decided to take a closer look, so she began examining the toys in the room. To her surprise, there was not even a speck of dust anywhere. She could also feel that everyone around her had been waiting for her arrival and had prepared everything in advance, and that all of their emotions were sincere rather than fake. The Grand Duke stood nearby watching, but suddenly he noticed that the smile had disappeared from his daughter's face. This made him very uneasy, because he had clearly done his best to make everything perfect. He asked the girl what was wrong. The Grand Duke thought she might not like the room, so he told her that if she wanted, she could choose another one. Smiling, Irita replied that it was nothing like that. She was simply so happy to finally be home, and she truly loved this room. She thanked her father for it. Aslan was glad to hear those words, but still reminded her that if she ever wanted to change rooms, she only had to say so. A moment later, an unfamiliar voice interrupted their conversation with a call of "Father." Standing opposite the Grand Duke and Irita was a young man. He introduced himself as Islan. He was the heir of the Crovahart's family and Irita's older brother. The boy looked remarkably like his father. The same hair, the same vivid red eyes. He walked over to the girl, wanting to introduce himself, and for a moment, the two simply stared at each other in silence. Irita heard that he was 5 years older than she was. The heroine widened her eyes and kept looking at her brother. At the same time, the boy stood across from her, staring at Irita as well. Suddenly, the little girl clutched at her chest. She felt something strange inside her, yet did not know exactly what it was. It felt somewhat like the magic she had sensed during the teleportation. The girl could barely breathe. Some kind of aura was radiating from Islan, but she did not understand why he was using magic now. Just then, a heavy hand fell on Irita's shoulder. It was her father's hand. Turning to Islan, he told him to control his emotions, because his power was overflowing and affecting Irita. Only then was the girl finally able to breathe again. She began to understand how to control her own power, and Islan apologized to his younger sister. Then he apologized once more and asked whether he could come a little closer to her. Before the girl could answer, he had already stepped forward and stood very near her. He gazed at her for a long time, saying nothing. Then he gently touched Irita's beautiful long hair and softly spoke her name. It seemed that, after so many years, finally seeing his own little sister with his own eyes had left him deeply shaken. He gently embraced the heroine, thanked her for coming home, and promised that he would never let her be alone again. Tears began to stream down Islan's face. Clearly, the older brother was overwhelmed with happiness at finally seeing his family reunited after so long. But for Irita, all of this was a little too much. Afterward, the little girl decided to play with the toys and dolls in her room to distract herself. Yet Aslan and Islan still stood there, watching her play with hearts full of emotion. She could not help wondering how much longer they were going to keep standing there and watching her like that. But after a while, they finally came closer to her. Her father said they would leave for now, so Irita could get some rest. He also told her to change into something more comfortable and said she could do whatever she wanted, which made the girl very happy. After that, Aslan began speaking with his son. He said that he had spent all these years searching for Irita, but now it seemed that her disappearance had not been an accident, so they had to keep the fact that they had found her a secret for the time being. Islan immediately confirmed whether his father meant that certain people were looking for Irita and received an affirmative answer. Then he asked his father whether he had already guessed who was behind it, and again received a yes. Although they still did not have conclusive evidence, the only ones who could possibly be responsible were the royal family or the Queen's faction. Since Queen Ashila had been their mother's close friend for many years, the Queen's faction had become the primary target of suspicion. That's right, the main suspects behind Irita's disappearance were the Queen, her family, and the Duke Lannison household. At that moment, the Grand Duke suddenly remembered something: the tattoo. The man who had handed the child over had a tattoo on the back of his hand. It was a circular flower design. It looked very much like the crest of the Duke Lannison family, but there was still no solid proof. Even so, simply doing nothing was by no means the best option. The Grand Duke nodded in agreement and said that they could never let something like this go. In that case, it was necessary to make a plan and expose everyone involved in Irita's disappearance. A professional hunter always sets a trap before beginning the hunt. That was the method proposed by the Grand Duke. He wanted to lay a snare for those people, and once the culprit was caught, even if that person was the queen, there would be absolutely no escape. In the original novel, the villain was the rough and cruel Grand Duke Crovahearts. Yet Irita's brother and father showed her nothing but gentle smiles. "I'll never leave you alone again," her brother told her. "Thank you for coming home," her father told her. Perhaps recovering their lost family member was an immense joy to them, but whenever Irita saw their sincere smiles, she felt uneasy, as though she were deceiving them. Lying in her room and hugging a new toy, the girl thought about all this. The Irita that Aslan and Island loved was not her. The girl often wondered whether perhaps her father had simply made a mistake and that she was not really their daughter. She also felt that she herself was something wrong because she still remembered her previous life. She could not help wondering whether Island and Aslan would discover that. Would they be happy that at least Irita's appearance had returned, or would they be disappointed that it was actually someone else wearing the face of their daughter and sister? She sincerely hoped they would accept it all as fate. Irita knew she was selfish, but she did not want to be alone anymore. The next day, Irita began to feel that Mary was a little frightening. Just how much enthusiasm did it take to make the heroine try on 5 different outfits every day and redo her hairstyle each time to match the clothes? She had only barely managed to escape by using the excuse that her father was waiting for her. Using that as her reason, Irita carefully knocked on the Grand Duke's door. The one who opened it for her was her brother, who, as always, was smiling broadly. He was happy every time he saw his little sister. He let her in and said that he had already started to get bored. The girl thought he was speaking a little too casually. The two walked toward their father together, but something made Irita stop in surprise. Island was sitting in front of her, holding some kind of paper in his hand. Irita let out a small sigh of relief, thinking how fortunate it was that the only person here was not just her brother. Her father lifted the girl onto his lap and asked whether she had finished looking around her room. Smiling, she replied that she loved everything very much. Then it suddenly occurred to her that she had practically thrown herself at her father without thinking, and only now did she realize that Island might not like that. He might get jealous. Island seemed to understand what she was thinking and gestured to his sister not to worry. Their father remarked that it had been a long time since he had seen his son smile like that. He asked Island whether he really liked his little sister that much, and received a firm, certain answer. She really was very adorable. Both her father and her brother said things like that often. Everyone liked this child very much. But then Island suggested that their father should stop while he was ahead, because he could tell that his actions were already making Irita shy, and they still had something important they wanted to discuss with her. That made the girl uneasy, because she had no idea what important matter they could possibly want to discuss with her. The Grand Duke explained that, for the time being, he wanted to keep the news of the little girl's return home a secret. Irita fell silent. She did not know how to answer, nor did she understand the purpose of doing that or whether it meant something bad. Afterward, Island added that, in order to prevent any possible danger, he hoped his sister would stay inside the mansion for now, even if it would be somewhat inconvenient. She smiled and agreed, but inwardly, she wondered whether he had considered her opinion at all on this matter. This decision had been made for safety reasons, and after the conversation ended, her father thanked his daughter for understanding. Then the Grand Duke suggested taking her to see the entire mansion, but at that moment Fane entered the room, carrying a thick stack of documents in his arms. He pushed the door open and cheerfully greeted the Grand Duke. As he walked toward Grand Duke Crovahearts with the papers, he also noticed that both the young miss and the young master were present. The Grand Duke did not immediately understand what Fane had brought, so Fane answered that these were all the documents that had piled up while the Grand Duke was away, and that he had already sorted out the portion that had to be dealt with today. Aslan awkwardly apologized to his daughter, saying that he would not be able to show her around the mansion after all. Fane apologized to her as well, but the little girl replied that it was all right. She added that perhaps she could tour the mansion with her brother instead. Naturally, Island was delighted to hear that, and said he would be happy to show Irita everything, and Fane wanted to come along too. She gently reached out her hand to her brother so that she would not get lost, and he asked whether she would feel disappointed because their father could not join them for a walk today. Of course not, Irita answered with her usual smile. After they left, Fane remarked that the young master seemed to be in an especially good mood today, meaning the Grand Duke's son. He had also noticed that Island was smiling more often than before. In the past, he had only ever seen Island smile in front of Sarabia, and now he was doing the same in front of Irita. For that very reason, the Grand Duke could never forgive the person who had stolen the smiles from both his son and daughter. Fane then added that he had obtained new information on the matter. One of the Queen's spies had gone to the orphanage, pretending to be a relative there to claim the director's body. The crucial question was whether any records regarding Irita still remained at the orphanage. According to the documents, the girl had been adopted by a foreign noble. Even if the Queen tried to find her, she would never be able to. Those nobles would disappear into the sea along with the ship that sank on their journey home. All right, then what about that man? The Grand Duke asked. Fane replied that Kyle already had them under watch and could seize them at any time. They hid well for 7 whole years, said Grand Duke Crovahearts. He ordered Kyle to bring that man here without harming even a single hair on his head. He intended to make that person fully understand what the true wrath of Grand Duke Aslan Crovahearts looked like. Meanwhile, Island and Irita were walking around the mansion when the girl suddenly stopped in front of a large window. The sight before her left her in awe. It was the first time she had ever seen such a beautiful garden. She stood there as if enchanted, simply admiring the place in silence. "You liked it here when you were little," Island said, and those words brought a look of surprise to the girl's face. Then her brother began to explain the origin of the garden. It turned out that the Grand Duke had built it especially for their mother. Sarabia had always wanted a garden of her own, but she was not good at caring for plants, so Aslan had done it all for her. Irita remembered now. This garden really had existed in the original story. It was the place where Aslan had shown weakness for the first time before his death, and only now did she realize that it was Sarabia's garden. Irita decided to put those thoughts aside and stop dwelling on the misfortunes from the original story that had not yet happened. Just then, her brother suddenly called her name. He asked whether his sister wanted to go for a walk with him. Naturally, the girl could not have been happier to accept such an invitation. The two of them walked closer to the fountain, and that surprised the little girl as well. She even cried out that the fountain was unbelievably huge. Then her attention was quickly drawn to the equally beautiful flowers all around them. She loved everything about this place, but because they had been walking for so long, the heroine's legs began to hurt, so she told Island. But right afterward, she hesitated and said she had only been joking. Her brother told her to answer honestly, yet an awkward look appeared on the girl's face, and for some reason, she even apologized to him. She did not want to say it out loud because she did not want Island to keep treating her like some helpless marshmallow. The man laughed and asked if she did not like everyone treating her that way. Irita hurriedly denied it, then added that she simply did not like her brother treating her as if she were someone who could do nothing. He picked up on her words and said, like a helpless marshmallow. Then he laughed even harder. He apologized, saying he had just found it too funny. Still, he told the girl not to force herself to keep walking and suggested that she rest under a tree instead. But just then, something caught Island's attention, so he told Irita to wait a moment. The two of them sat down under the tree, and the girl wondered how much longer it would take before she got used to being treated like this. She even felt that perhaps one lifetime would not be enough for her to get used to it, but her brother told her to look up. Something had surprised him. The light falling through the leaves looked like stars, he said, then added that it was as bright and beautiful as his little sister, and as warm and gentle as sunlight. If Island learned who the real Irita truly was, would he still keep treating her this kindly? The heroine wondered. If this warmth disappeared, would she really be able to bear it? She lowered her head, hugged her knees sadly, and then asked him whether he truly thought of her as his little sister. Island naturally answered yes, but she immediately pressed him again. What if you're wrong? What if she was nothing more than another black-haired, violet-eyed girl? The heroine had always been troubled by these questions, and now she was finally able to say them out loud herself. She even began hoping that he would simply say right now now that he knew she was not Irida. Life in a shelter, loneliness, she could endure all of it. The girl went on speaking. She still hoped he would say that he had actually noticed long ago and did not need her after all. But suddenly, her brother only pulled her tightly into his arms and told her not to worry. He wanted to calm his sister down, and he also wanted her to know that he and their father truly loved her and truly feared losing her. He also said that if she felt afraid, then all she had to do was trust him and their father. "We are not mistaken," Island added as he continued holding his sister. "The one we love, the one we recognize as Irida, is the real Irida." Island also said that he promised they would never be separated again. But even though her brother told her that she was the real Irida, that neither he nor their father was mistaken, the girl's heart still felt heavy. Because in the end, she was still a stranger to this body, and that was how she herself felt too. She did not even know why she had come here in the first place. As she stood on the balcony of the mansion, she thought that perhaps a trip to the Imperial Palace might help her uncover more. But even so, Island and her father's love for her would not change. After thinking for a long time, the girl convinced herself that she had to become stronger. The people who loved her and the people she loved were changing their tragic future. In the end, she concluded that for now, all she needed to do was focus on that. A few days later, the Grand Duke and his son stood in the corridor. Aslan asked if it was true, and the other man answered that it was. Island said that whenever he remembered how Irida had cried that day, his heart still felt as if it were being cut by knives. The Grand Duke could hardly believe such a thing had happened. Irida should have accepted her family's love without hesitation, yet she felt that love did not belong to her. Worse still, she was afraid of being abandoned. Her father told Island that if something like that happened again, he had to comfort Irida first. Their conversation was interrupted by Fane, who appeared as suddenly as ever. He reported that Kyle had successfully captured that person. He would arrive by noon tomorrow, and now the Grand Duke could finally officially announce Irida's return. The person who had abandoned the girl at the orphanage apparently still believed they had been saving her. "How absurd," Aslan said angrily. Fane asked whether young Master Island should be informed, but Aslan answered that he would tell him personally, because right now all his son could think about was how to spend a little more time with Irida. And right now, the only thing that truly mattered was her safety. Official announcement: Irida Crova Hearts, daughter of Aslan Crova Hearts and the Grand Duchess of Crova Hearts, has returned. The moment she saw this news, a glass fell to the floor along with a shriek. The red-haired girl was beside herself with rage. She shouted that the wretched brat should have died in the sea long ago, while her maid tried to calm her down. "I was certain she was already dead," she went on screaming as she crumpled the paper bearing the official announcement into a ball. 7 years ago, the girl had not personally confirmed the heroine's death, so she had never imagined that all of this would come back to haunt her. In another year, everything would be ready, she said. She kept reassuring herself that everything would be fine. After all, she had already given orders to deal with the matter. No matter how powerful the Crova Hearts family was, there was no way they could still uncover the truth 7 years later. The girl decided that she had to put an end to all of this immediately. She absolutely could not allow the Crova Hearts family to uncover the truth first. A year later, a blonde woman lay in bed. It was the Empress Dowager. No, her condition was extremely grave. Her son sat beside her, holding her hand and crying as he begged her not to die, not to leave him. A year had passed since Irida's return was announced. That incident had caused a huge uproar in the imperial capital, but because she had never once left the mansion, the girl knew nothing about it. At the same time, many things had changed. She had grown closer both to the people in the mansion and to her family. The heroine had also begun learning magic from Fane. In Fane's words, the girl had astonishing talent for magic, though her father seemed especially worried about that. But the heroine felt that it would be very helpful to her. It meant she would have one more weapon in the future when facing whatever lay ahead. And Fane had also proven that he really was a very good teacher. Although his style was somewhat Spartan, he truly knew how to focus on the essentials. If he had been born in Korea, he probably would have become a very famous teacher, Irida thought. For that reason, studying had become genuinely enjoyable. Who would have thought that reading and studying could actually be fun for the heroine? But the heroine's thoughts were interrupted by a maid. The maid said she had been looking everywhere for her. Mary said her master had asked for her to come at once, and that it seemed urgent. But Irita thought that they had only had breakfast together a few hours earlier. A bad feeling immediately came over her. The girl hurried over as fast as she could. She saw her father, and the expression on his face clearly gave her no reason to feel relieved. It was the first time Irita had ever seen such a grim look on his face, so she asked what the Grand Duke wanted to tell her. Aslan told her that he needed to go to the imperial palace because the Empress Dowager had died. Uzra Valurda of the House of Valeria, mother of the 23rd Emperor Gamrian. Irita immediately remembered that the Empress Dowager was a character who had not died in the original story. She had helped Kilian become emperor, and she had also introduced him to the heroine. Her death meant that the future had already changed. The heroine immediately began thinking that the reason for these changes was most likely her own existence. In the original story, Aslan had never found his daughter. The Grand Duke cut off her thoughts and asked whether she was all right. He also said that if she did not want to go, then she did not have to. She could simply stay in the mansion. But the little girl looked at him with bright eyes and said she was fine and that she would go with him. She felt that she had to go in person. Deep down, the girl had a strong feeling that she needed to see it with her own eyes. The Grand Duke said that tomorrow he would first stop by their residence in the imperial capital and then go on to the palace. Irita decided to first review how it had been written in the original story. The novel had not originally been difficult to read, and she began recalling it. It was a healing story centered on Ella, the daughter of a baron. Loved dearly by her gentle parents from childhood, she went on to develop a romance with the second prince, Kilian. From the middle of the novel onward, the story shifted to Aslan, who supported the first prince, opposed Kilian, and eventually descended into madness. Not long after that, Aylin also chose to end his own life. That was the role her family had played in the original story. To Irita now, it seemed like such a simple and cliched novel that she could hardly believe she had once liked it so much. She had stumbled across the book by chance in a bookstore while out to buy a notebook. She had gone in with the money she earned from part-time work. But in the end, as if under some kind of spell, she bought that book instead. But the story in the original novel was completely different from what was unfolding now. And under these circumstances, Irita felt almost deceived. As for the Empress Dowager's death, the only suspect was the queen, the red-haired girl. The only person who could have killed the Empress Dowager was the second prince's mother, Queen Ashila. The male lead, Kilian Ruin Elvel, was only 11 now, and Irita would meet him tomorrow. To the girl, the thought that she was actually going to the Imperial Palace where the novel's plot unfolded felt very strange. But the heroine also thought it was a good opportunity. She had spent a year trying to unravel the mysteries in the plot, yet there were still things she could not understand. Most of all, how had the first prince managed to draw her father onto his side? In the original story, her father had indeed fought on the first prince's side and had ultimately gone mad, but the girl knew very well that the Grand Duke would never do such a thing merely for his own benefit. If this was a power struggle, then it had to involve the queen. Perhaps this death was only the beginning, but for now she would wait until tomorrow. After all, there were still 9 years left before the original story truly began, and in that time, the only major event that had happened was the funeral ceremony at the palace. But at least the heroine would finally be able to see the true face of the one behind everything. Then the next day arrived. Irita noticed something on her father's hand and asked what it was. He answered that it was a bracelet with a signal stone set into it. He handed it to Irita and told her to keep it with her at all times. If she sent him a signal with it, the bracelet would activate. "It looks like you stayed up late again last night," the Grand Duke said, then added that if anything happened, he would come to her immediately, so she should not worry. The two agreed to go in together. This was the Temple of the Sun. As expected of the sacred center of the Empire's state religion, every part of it was decorated with splendor and elegance. Just then, someone announced that Queen Ashila Ranison and First Prince Tessie's Ruin Elvel had arrived. They were here. As they approached, the heroine could not help stiffening with tension. The way they wiped away their tears made them look as though they were overwhelmed with grief. Irita thought that probably no one would believe that the Empress Dowager and the Queen had actually not been on good terms. Since they had already come in, that meant Kilian Ruin Elvel would appear soon as well. Sure enough, the second prince arrived. He had not inherited the royal family's symbolic golden hair. He was the male lead of the story Irita had loved in her previous life. The priest began reciting the prayer. Silence filled the surroundings, and the one who had lost family because history had changed was undoubtedly the one suffering the most. Yet Irita noticed that he was pretending everything was fine. He was clenching his fists so tightly that his hands had turned white. Even if he was a prince, it had to be difficult to remain calm after his mother's death. She had heard that the Empress Dowager had died right before Kilian's eyes. It was hard to imagine how great a shock he must have suffered at that moment. Irita could not help wondering what she should do if he had lost the only person who understood him because of her. After all, the only thing different from the original story was Irita herself. If history had truly changed because of her, then she had to make sure no one else would be hurt because of it. This kind of loneliness was something the heroine understood better than anyone. The heroine had assumed they would go straight home once the funeral was over, but the Grand Duke told Islan to look after his sister, while he himself said he would return soon. Aslan went to meet the Emperor, while the young girl simply decided to stroll around the courtyard. Islan, however, looked a little reluctant. She noticed that even the fountain was studded with jewels. Islan saw that Irita seemed lost in thought and asked what she was thinking about. Then she suddenly asked an unexpected question. If we sold this fountain, how much money would we get? Islan said she sometimes came up with the strangest thoughts. The girl told him not to make fun of her, but he kept the topic going and even said that if she liked the fountain, they could buy an identical one for their own garden. But just then, a man came hurrying toward them and called out to the young duke's son. Islan asked what had happened, and the man replied that he had something important to report. Islan told his sister to wait for him inside the palace, but she answered that she would keep walking in the garden. Everything will be fine. Islan was still worried and asked again if she would really be all right on her own. But the girl once more said it was fine and reminded him that she was wearing the bracelet their father had given her. Islan warned her once again that if anything happened, she had to call for him at once, and he would come immediately. With that, they parted ways. Irita decided to practice a little magic. After walking some distance away, she felt that this spot was just right. She began casting a few spells and remembered the practice method Fane had taught her in class. Her efforts had clearly paid off. Controlling magic had become much easier for Irita. Now, it was time to take the next step, but at that moment, she had to stop. She noticed Kilian standing nearby. But why was he here? For a while, they simply stood there staring at each other. The boy clearly had not expected anyone to be here either. Irita grew flustered and did not know what to do. Maybe I should say hello, she thought. But just as she opened her mouth to greet him, the boy raised a finger to his lips, signaling for her to say nothing and stay quiet. Voices came from the distance, and the heroine could tell at once that those people were searching for the prince. She guessed he was trying to avoid everyone and had happened to run into her instead. Kilian whispered an apology and asked her to stay quiet. But suddenly the two of them heard footsteps approaching. It seemed those people had heard them talking here. The voice kept calling out tentatively, over and over, "Your Highness, are you here?" Meanwhile, the two remained seated in silence, not making a sound. Irita felt there was no other choice. Kilian needed help. Using magic, she concealed the two of them, and in the blink of an eye, it was as though they had vanished into thin air. Even after they could no longer be seen, they continued to keep silent. The person searching for the boy assumed he had misheard and began to leave. The two stayed quietly where they were for a little longer as a precaution, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Irita explained that they had to act quickly, which was why they were so close together under the barrier. Kilian began speaking in a whisper, but Irita told him he could speak normally, since no one could see or hear them anyway. Both her father and Fane had told Irita not to use magic outside the house, but this time was an exception. She simply did not want Kilian to get hurt because of her again. The two looked around and made sure no one was nearby. The boy thanked the heroine, saying that thanks to her, he had not been caught, and added that he had never expected the young lady to be able to use magic. He offered to help her in return. Irita held out her hand and asked him not to tell anyone that she had used magic. He understood that if people found out, the heroine could end up in trouble, so he promised to keep silent. Irita froze for a moment, gazing at his silver hair, every strand of it glimmering in the moonlight. But then he suddenly said that it sounded like someone was looking for her. Sure enough, a voice in the distance was calling Irita's name. They were just about to leave when Irita suddenly stopped Kilian and handed him the bracelet she had made herself. She still did not know whether it really counted as superstition, but this bracelet brought Irita good luck. The boy took it in his hand and smiled faintly. She hoped the prince would not run into trouble again, because there was no one else left on his side. That black-haired girl, the young lady of House Crovahearts. Killian had heard that for a long time. She had not even known she had any family. And yet, despite everything she had gone through, she could still wear a smile like that. He, too, hoped Irita would find happiness. And with her lucky bracelet in his hand, he smiled softly. After returning home, she stepped out onto the balcony and let out a heavy sigh. She thought back on everything that had happened recently. The Queen's funeral had never existed in the original story, and now Irita had also run into the male lead by chance in the garden. Holding her head, she thought that today had been absolute chaos. The entire day had strayed from the framework of the original novel. She remembered the words she had said to the boy when they parted. "I hope you find your own happiness, Your Highness." That only made things even more absurd. How had she blurted out something like that? The heroine worried that he probably thought she was talking nonsense. In the original story, Killian was the enemy of her family. He was the very one responsible for the deaths of Irita's father and brother. But now everything had changed. Perhaps she might even be able to bring Killian over to her side. If Irita succeeded, she could change her family's fate and save her father and brother's lives. But just then, the girl suddenly felt unwell. A wave of dizziness hit her, and her vision darkened. Certain voices began echoing in her mind, insisting that the Grand Duke was not as he appeared on the surface. Startled by this sudden shock, Irita clutched her head. There must have been a reason the Duke sided with my brother. Maybe it was magic, maybe a curse. The voice in her head continued, and Irita could no longer endure it. This was the first time something like this had ever happened to her, and in fear and helplessness, she collapsed to the ground and waited for it all to end. She could not understand why these visions, and that silver hair she had seen by chance, had suddenly appeared before her eyes. She realized it had to be Killian. Perhaps Irita had merely seen an untold part of the original story's past. In the vision she saw, Killian spoke in a tone that made it sound as if he knew her father very well, as if he knew he was the kind of man who remained loyal to those he trusted. The heroine began to think that perhaps her father had originally supported Killian, but later, for some reason, switched sides and stood with the First Prince. Perhaps the First Prince and the Queen had put some kind of pressure on him. And now, whenever Irita thought about it, the word curse began to echo in her mind. Perhaps her father had once been cursed, but ordinary magic would not work on him because he was a master swordsman. The girl did not know why she was seeing such visions, but she knew this was something worth serious thought. She decided that the only person she could ask about curses was Fane, so at daybreak, she went to find him, and as always, the man welcomed her with a smile. He thought something must have happened for Irita to come looking for him so early. Fane asked why she had suddenly become interested in curses. The girl only smiled, unable to think of an answer right away. She knew very well that showing up at dawn to ask such a question looked suspicious no matter how one saw it. She had to come up with an excuse quickly, so she said she only wanted to understand what kinds of dangers might exist. But the man told the young lady not to worry, because no matter what happened, he would always remain by her side. Irita did not back down, however, and asked again how much he knew about curses, especially the kind that could affect a master swordsman. Hearing such a question, Fane looked slightly uncomfortable, then asked whether His Majesty had done something to offend the young lady. Even 8 years later, he said, trying to curse a master swordsman would be extremely difficult. In fact, compared to true magic, curses were closer to folklore. If Irita was looking for a spell powerful enough to curse a master swordsman, then black magic would be more realistic. Irita had recorded every piece of information related to that subject in her notebook over the years. At that moment, Mary suddenly appeared in the doorway and cheerfully said that she had known the young lady would be here today. The girl smiled sweetly at the maid as well and asked what was going on. As Mary brushed Irita's hair, she gently scolded her a little. The maid truly could not understand how much someone had to love books to lose all track of time like that, because the heroine had nearly missed her own farewell banquet. Irita apologized and said she had not noticed how quickly time had passed at all. 2 years earlier, she had gone north with her father, and the reason for today's farewell banquet was that Irita had now turned 18 and had to go to the capital for the investiture ceremony. All the questions and preparations surrounding the investiture had swept over her like a whirlwind these past few days. The North had once been cold and lifeless, but thanks to Irida, it had become lively for many people. That was why everyone seemed so saddened by the heroine's departure. Mary said that today she was going to make sure the young lady looked absolutely flawless, so she ordered her not even to think about resisting. Right after that, the doors of the hall were pushed open. Everything for the farewell ceremony was ready. The Grand Duke was also dressed especially splendidly and looked as radiant as ever. After seeing his daughter, he said that she had always been beautiful, but now even more so. The Grand Duke also said he only wished her brother could see her like this too. The heroine noticed that her father had even put on his uniform, and he replied that she herself had asked him to do so just a week ago. After exchanging a few compliments, the two prepared to go in. The guests had already gathered inside. Pleasant music was flowing through the hall, and everything had been arranged to perfection. At the sight of such a magnificent scene, a smile immediately spread across Irida's face. The Grand Duke saw his daughter's reaction and felt very satisfied. Suddenly, Fane appeared beside him and said he could not possibly be late for an occasion like this, adding that, strange as it felt to say, the young lady of their house had truly grown up. But sometimes her father still found himself wondering what exactly was going on inside that little head of hers, and what it was that kept her from ever truly relaxing. The Grand Duke asked whether Fane knew anything, then added that if Irida wanted to keep it secret, he would not force her, but he hoped Fane would support her in this matter. Her magic lessons, as well as the research she had been carrying on since childhood, were all very interesting. The Grand Duke only asked him to make absolutely certain that the girl would not be hurt because of any of it. Fane allowed a soft breath. He realized that Aslan did not know Irida had come into contact with black magic, so he promised that everything would be fine. Still, Fane also reminded the heroine that whenever it came to her, the Grand Duke always noticed. It was just that her smile resolved everything, so it seemed she could do whatever she wanted. The next day, the girl was ready to leave for the capital, while Mary checked whether they had packed everything they needed. Setting out again, after being away from the North for a full 2 years, felt strangely different, and when Irida had first arrived at the Grand Duke's territory, she had not seriously thought about any of this. Today, the girl would leave the North and head for the capital. Because Keelian had returned a year early, the plot had begun moving ahead sooner than it originally should have. Irida had finally arrived. Lost in thought, she looked at the estate she had not seen in such a long time. Fane lowered his head with a strange expression and told the young lady that this was really too much. His body was no longer what it used to be, and even using teleportation magic had become very taxing for him. But the girl only smiled and told him not to say such silly things, because he was still very young. Fane said it was a matter of stamina, to which Aslan replied that in that case, perhaps the commander of the Night Knights should put Fane through some drills. Of course, they were only joking, and the one who interrupted their conversation was Island, who had also arrived at the estate. Both Irida and Aslan cried out in delight. They were overjoyed to see him. The girl immediately threw herself into her brother's arms and said she had missed him terribly. Her brother at once began asking whether everything had gone well for her during that time. She answered that she had been doing very well and asked how things had been on his side too. She noticed that Island had grown a little thinner since the last time they met, but Island only lightly patted his sister's cheek and said that Irida was still just as adorable and beautiful as ever. The maids began whispering among themselves. They had never seen Island smile like that before, but Irida was already used to it. Their father suggested they stop chatting for now and go inside the estate, and Island agreed, since it had clearly grown much colder outside. So the family went into the house together. The capital really was enormous, and there were many cafes near the estate as well. The girl looked around happily, full of admiration. Irida was reminded of her childhood. Back then, she had only ever gone back and forth between the Imperial Palace and home, so she had never noticed that people in the capital were not particularly surprised by black hair. Island explained that this place was originally much like the Grand Duke's territory anyway, since this was the true ancestral home of their family. The farther one went from the capital, the more people believed in old legends, whereas there were not many such people in the capital. Here, the claim that black hair was the blood of demons or a symbol of a curse was nothing more than a fairy tale. Only now did Irida understand why Risen, where she had grown up, had been so full of prejudice. Just then, a woman working at the cafe approached them. She brought over dessert and wished them an enjoyable meal. Island wanted his sister to try it, and the moment the cake touched her tongue, the girl's eyes widened in surprise. It was unbelievably delicious. Irita even asked her brother how he had found this cafe. Island said he had asked someone who lived in the capital, telling them that his little sister loved sweets very much, and they had recommended this place. Irita immediately grew curious who Island would ask in the capital, and guessed that it was His Highness the Second Prince. Island looked a little surprised by the guess. At the same time, though delighted by the dessert, Irita could not help thinking of Killian. Island asked how she knew that prince, then added that they had only met by chance. But Irita did not understand what exactly the difference was between a chance meeting and being close. In the original story, Island and Killian had been enemies, and Killian had left the capital for the battlefield 4 years ago. Island, meanwhile, had come to the capital 2 years ago. It was unclear when the two had first met. Killian had only returned last month. His return was already different from the original story, so the original course of events should no longer hold true either. Even so, she asked her brother how they had met, and Island answered that he would tell her later. There were reasons for it. Irita understood that if she kept pressing, it would only make her seem suspicious. Island promised that he would tell her everything later, and the girl believed him. Suddenly, the wind picked up and blew the hat off her head. It was a hat her father had given her, so it would be a shame if it were lost forever. But just then, she saw that her hat was in the hands of a strange man. He had caught it and was walking toward Irita. He handed the recovered hat back to the girl, and she thanked him. The young man was wearing a hood, and his silver hair covered his eyes. Because of that, Irita could not see his face clearly at all. The stranger said that it looked like someone was waiting for her, so she had better hurry back. Irita was confused by the sudden turn of events and was just about to turn around, when at that very moment the stranger vanished all at once, leaving the heroine standing alone in the square. She asked the approaching Island who that man was, but Island only suggested that they return first. She tried to take her mind off it and not overthink the matter, so she smiled and answered that she was coming. But the image of that stranger kept circling in her mind. Was he really in that much a hurry? The girl wondered to herself. Meanwhile, the young man was standing at a corner, watching them. Island and Irita sat quietly facing each other for a while. The girl was happy. Thanks to her brother, she had been able to buy a birthday present for her father, and she sincerely hoped he would like it. But just then, Island suddenly called her name, interrupting her thoughts. He handed her a box. It was the very item Island had bought when they had gone out to buy a gift for their father. It was something he had ordered custom-made. When Island picked it up, he had even said he would come back later for the rest. Irita asked her brother whether she should open it and see what was inside. She herself was very curious, but Island said it was time to go. He added that everything was perfect and that he trusted Cardin's craftsmanship completely, to which the man replied that such praise was making him embarrassed. They said their goodbyes, and Cardin said he would see them next time. Irita remembered that the man's name was Cardin. It seemed her brother was quite familiar with him. She asked whether this was not the gift her brother had bought for their father. Island replied that the gift for their father was a different one, and that this was for her, urging her to open it quickly. He had originally wanted to give it to her as a New Year's present, but something had happened in the meantime. Only then did Irita remember that her brother had been supposed to come north 2 months ago, but had failed to do so. Something must have happened. When the girl opened the box, she saw a beautiful necklace and a pair of earrings inside. They were the exact same color as her eyes, a bright violet. The girl cried out in delight that she loved them, and Island was happy to hear it. He added that this was also a belated coming-of-age gift. At last, I made it out safely, Irita thought to herself as she stood in the middle of the square. She had changed her hair color with magic, so she did not have to worry about strange looks from others. Mary was still worried because they had not even finished sightseeing yesterday, but Irita said she had a few things she wanted to look into herself and promised to return before dinner. The girl thought for a while about where it would be best to begin her investigation. Since she did not know when the original story would begin, she had to gather as many clues related to black magic as possible. So Irita headed to the library. She had not been able to find much information to begin with, so she was not especially hopeful. But since this was the capital, there might be something useful. 3 years ago, black magic had been officially banned in the Empire, and after that, most information related to it had disappeared as well. She looked through many books, but still could not find anything suitable. Then, as she walked to the next row of shelves, she tripped over a stack of books and nearly fell. Irita turned around, feeling that it was strange for several books to be lying on the floor like that. Perhaps this was not mere coincidence. The girl, crouched down on the floor, decided to take a close look at what those books were. And what she saw filled her with delight. She could hardly believe her eyes. It really was a book about black magic. The price of using black magic was the caster's soul, but after many years of research, black mages had found a way to avoid sacrificing themselves. That method required the sacrifice of a child's soul, and the most effective offering was a living infant less than 100 days old. However, this was something the heroine had already known. There was also one fact not mentioned here. If black mages could not perform sacrifices regularly, they would lose their power. Because of this, black mages obsessed with power kidnapped children as offerings, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of children. The officially recorded death toll was already horrifying, and the real number was likely even higher. That was why black magic had been banned. In addition, after black magic was outlawed, the Empire announced a manhunt for black mages. But because they were indistinguishable from ordinary people, not all of them could be found. If the queen had used black magic, then she had most likely sacrificed children before. Irita carefully read everything written there. She wanted to obtain as much new information as possible. And then, at last, she found something. It said, "What I wish to leave recorded in this book is a method for identifying those who sacrifice children rather than themselves." It was as if she had hit the jackpot. Delighted by the discovery, the girl took the book with her. She decided she had to return home quickly and finish reading it. But just then, several people blocked the heroine's path and said to her, "Hey miss, where are you going?" They looked like local thugs. At first, the girl answered politely that she was in a hurry and asked them to move aside, but they rudely replied that they were in a hurry too. So what should they do now? They also said she needed to come with them somewhere at once. All of this was beginning to make Irita angry. She snapped her fingers, and in an instant, dazzling flames swallowed the surroundings. Those men screamed, and one of them even collapsed to the ground in fear. They started shouting that she was a mage. "So, will you get out of my way now?" the heroine asked with a smile. They did not even have time to answer before fleeing frantically from her, only shouting apologies to her as they ran. Apparently, that was their way of apologizing. She finally let out a sigh of relief and said they had really been lucky. But just as the girl was about to continue on her way, a voice came from behind, saying that her abilities were truly remarkable. She turned around and saw a familiar man in a black cloak standing before her. It was the same person who had caught her hat earlier. But who in the world was he? She asked the young man who he was. He first apologized for startling her, then took off his hood. He answered that he was merely a knight of peace passing by. He also said that he had thought the girl was in trouble and had wanted to help, but it seemed he had arrived too late, since she had already solved the problem on her own. Yet Irita could not shake the feeling that she had seen him somewhere before. The man simply stood there quietly, watching her. Then he stepped closer to the heroine and asked a strange question. Did she happen to like his face? The girl did not panic, but instead asked him in return whether he truly was a knight, as he had said. He answered that it was true, that he simply wandered from place to place, and that he had been in the capital for less than a month. Irita said that she had not been to the capital in a long time either. She then asked where the knight had been before coming here. He said he had mostly been in the border regions, because monsters had been running rampant there for several years. Calling Irita a mage, the knight asked why she was in the capital. She was flustered at first, but soon calmed down, because he clearly did not yet know who she was. "I was in the north before this. I came to the capital with my family," the girl answered. This knight had also been to the north. He had gone there 4 years ago. He remembered that life there had been very hard at the time. Irita guessed that if he had suffered 4 years ago, it was probably because of the monsters as well. Still, she decided to end the conversation, saying that she had to go or her family would worry. As they parted, both said they were glad to have met each other, and then bid one another farewell. He added that the next time they met, the girl could simply call him by his name, Leon. She was a little surprised to hear him mention a next meeting, but he immediately added with a gentle smile, "If fate allows." That made Irita pause slightly. Why did she have this feeling that she knew this person? At parting, she also said that if they were truly fated to meet again, then she would tell him her name then. She said goodbye to the knight once more, and then started to leave. He also bowed politely in farewell and said that he would look forward to seeing her again. After returning home, the girl immediately began studying the book she had brought back from the library. To create a magic tool capable of identifying black mages, specific materials were required, and even after gathering them all, the help of a high-ranking mage was still necessary. The girl could not understand how anyone had ever come up with such a method. It was far too complicated, so she began reading the explanation of the materials needed to make the tool. First was a diamond, which was expensive even among gemstones. And not just any size would do. It had to be large enough to contain magic power, which meant that someone without money could never manage it. She began to wonder whether she should trust this book, but no matter what, Irita decided to keep reading for now. For personal use, this would be more than enough. All this time, Irita had been working hard to change her family's fate. She had made use of knowledge from the original story and had also borrowed the heroine Ella's accomplishments. She had secured several highly profitable businesses and had also brought 2 talented people to her side in this world. With such preparations, it would be much easier to help Killian when the time came. Of course, it would be best if Killian could become crown prince without any trouble. But if the emperor appointed Killian as crown prince, the first prince's faction would never sit by and do nothing. To prepare in advance, Irita had to find proof that the queen had used black magic, and that was also why she had seized Ella's achievement first. The girl hoped Ella would understand. The heroine thought that once this letter was sent, all the preparations could begin, but if she wanted to finish in less than a month, she would have to work twice as hard, so Irita decided to start in earnest from the next day. Not long after, Mary came to the door of the room and asked the heroine why she had called for her. The girl handed her a letter and asked her to deliver it to the Lagras Merchants Guild tomorrow. After that, she simply collapsed onto the bed in exhaustion because she had been truly worn out that day. There was still far too much she had to do to change her family's fate. If only the original work had gone into more detail, Irita would not have been in such a difficult position. She really wanted to know why her family had sided with the first prince. The girl felt sorry for Ella, but if she wanted to save herself and her family, she had no other choice. After all, this world originally belonged to Ella, so there probably would not be any major problem. Besides, the original story had already been thrown badly off course. The queen had died 8 years earlier, and Killian had returned to the imperial capital a year ahead of schedule. 2 major events had already deviated from the original plot. If that was not a disaster, then what was? Lying in bed, Irita thought this before falling asleep. No matter what, the heroine still carried the role of helping Killian, so she hoped Ella would not resent her too much. In the morning, someone asked Irita whether the merchants should be called to the house. The girl replied that there was no need, since she had already planned to go out and get some air. She also told Mary that if anyone in the family came looking for her, she should say that Irita was at the plaza. The maid told her not to stay out too long, and the girl promised to be careful before leaving. Even then, her mind kept circling around what else she still had not done. She thought that if she invited the person she was meeting today into the house, and someone saw them, it would become a huge problem. If that happened, it would immediately expose her connection to the Lagras Merchants Guild. This place had not changed at all. That was what the heroine thought when she arrived there. Sitting by the table was a man flipping through documents and papers. Not wanting to startle him, the heroine quietly approached, then suddenly shouted, "Surprise!" She asked whether he was still as obsessed with tidiness as ever. The man's name was Yuljin. He replied that he was not obsessed with tidiness. He simply liked things to be where they belonged. Yuljin also said that next time, she should at least tell him beforehand that she was coming. In response, Irita said that she had already sent him a letter, and Mary had delivered it that morning, so it should arrive very soon. Yuljin Casey was the descendant of a fallen noble house. He had exceptional talent for business and a fair number of connections, and he was now the head of the Merchants Guild. In the original story, he was also one of the people Irita had stolen away from Ella. With Ella's help, Yuljin had founded his own merchant company, and it later became the most famous one in the empire. If Irita wanted to get her hands on money, she absolutely needed him. The girl did not know much about the future, so she could not build such a guild on her own. For years ago, the heroine had approached him and proposed that they work together. At first, he was naturally far from pleased, but now they had already spent 4 years working side by side. The girl remarked that back then, he really had been quite a cute fellow, and she herself had probably been too emotional, which was likely how things had ended up this way. "By the way, where's Tane?" Irita asked. In response, he said that Tane had gone away briefly on business and would probably need about a week, so he should be back today or tomorrow. Suddenly, someone walked in, and the girl turned her head in surprise. It was a young man. The moment he saw her, he too looked startled and called out her name. It was Tane. Irita walked over and asked how he had been lately. Tane was a beast man whom Ella had saved, and another person Irita had stolen from her side. Now the Wolf clan led all the beast men in the country, and Tane was the heir to that very clan. The girl had first met Tane 4 years earlier, just like Yuljin, at a fighting tournament. The hall was packed with people, and the host on stage announced that today's spectacle would surely be as thrilling as ever. Like everyone else there, Irita had concealed her face with a mask and wore a hood over her head. These all looked like titled, wealthy people. At the very least, if their identities were exposed, they would be able to get away easily, which was why they all hid behind masks. This arena was a place where the rich came for amusement. Irita thought they were all disgusting bastards, and the ones fighting beasts and monsters were beastmen. In the past, there had been several different beastman races, but the Empire had always looked down on them. In the end, they were captured and forced into servitude. As a result, the beastmen fled deep into the forests, far away from humans, and now only a few races remained. "Now, let us see who today's final attraction is," the host declared loudly. The star of today's arena is an extremely rare beastman from one of the lesser races. A frail-looking boy stepped onto the stage, his legs bound in chains. He was a beastman of the Wolf clan. That was Tane. The girl's eyes widened at once. This was the person she had been looking for. In the original story, Tane had been quite tall compared to others, so Irita had not expected him to be so small now. He was still growing, which is why he was so small. That was what the heroine thought. The host began announcing his opponent for the day, but at that moment, the man sitting beside Irita turned toward her. He had been about to say that this wolf beast man was the very one she had been looking for, but Irita had already confirmed it herself. In this place, beastmen were nothing more than tools for making money. Irita only hoped that at the very least, they were not being bought and sold here. That was why she had someone prepare what she needed. The girl knew that his owner had been searching for a monster's heart for 3 years, but she had not expected him to agree so readily. Irita proposed an exchange, and now she was standing in front of the wolf beast man, her gaze falling on the bracelet around his arm. The girl thought how fortunate it was that he was wearing that accessory. That bracelet was a magic item Irita had given Tane. He said that he had been kidnapped at the age of 5 and brought to the arena. At that time, his vocal cords had been damaged, and he had lost his voice ever since. Because the injury was so old, it was already too late to heal. And Irita had brought him here for the sake of her family as well. She wanted to give him his voice back. Tane must have gone through a great deal. The girl thanked him for continuing to wear the bracelet. She added that she had originally wanted to make it into an earring, but since she could not make the stone any smaller, she had no choice but to turn it into a bracelet, and she felt sorry about that. Tane replied that it was fine. Anything Miss Irita gave him, he liked. A bright smile spread across the girl's face. She was happy to hear that. Their conversation was interrupted by Yuljin, who asked Irita what she had come to see him about today. In truth, she really did have something she wanted to ask of him. By the time they reached the city, the streets felt especially quiet and empty. She was taking a walk with Tane, and Tane said that after so long, he had truly wanted to see her. She said that Tane had been very busy lately, so they had not had many chances to meet more often. But just then, she suddenly noticed something and came to an abrupt stop. At the corner of a building stood a man in a black robe. She saw his silver hair and immediately realized it was Leon. The girl ran over at once, wanting to confirm whether it really was him, greet him, and ask him a few questions as well. But by the time she reached the spot, no one was there. Perhaps she had only imagined it. Tane asked what had happened, and the heroine replied that she had suddenly thought she saw someone she knew standing at the corner. So they decided to keep walking, and Leon really had been there. He had simply hidden himself away, and he seemed badly injured. He could barely breathe and could only stand there leaning against the wall. He thought that, because of blood ties, she really was just like that queen after all. Leon absolutely did not want the girl to see him in such a state. He pressed his hand more firmly against the wound so that no blood would drip onto the ground. He thought that if Irita saw these injuries, she would surely worry because she was a kind person. Sometimes, she even worried over other people's troubles as if they were her own. To Leon, Irita was like an angel, so he did not want to bring her pain or trouble. But right now, he did not know when the concealment magic would wear off, so he could not go out. This was definitely not normal. At that moment, the man's eyes were filled with sorrow, and he did not understand what he should do. After returning home, the girl flung herself onto the bed. She had walked a lot today, and, as usual, her mind was full of countless thoughts. She thought of Leon. She was certain that their eyes had truly met. It could not have been an illusion. Now she clearly recalled the very instant their gazes crossed and understood that he really had been there. Irita could not understand why he had disappeared. Did he truly not want to see her? Or had he been deliberately avoiding her? Yet in every one of their previous encounters, he had always been the one to approach her first. But suddenly, her train of thought was interrupted by another idea. Why did she care about something like this? They could hardly even be called acquainted. She was even a little angry. It was all because the person she wanted to speak with kept avoiding her. The next day after lunch, Irita took a walk through the garden with her father, and the girl remarked that today's meal had been very delicious. The family chef, Evan, had even promised to serve them the finest dishes possible. The girl said with a smile that he had probably wanted to show off his skills properly on her father's birthday. Suddenly, the heroine stopped walking and carefully looked her father over. Smiling sweetly, she wished him a happy birthday. Her father looked extremely pleased, and Aslan thanked his daughter as well. He bowed his head solemnly and said that he loved the shirt and brooch she had given him. Into that brooch, she had embedded shield magic and teleportation magic. First, the shield magic could withstand most attacks about 3 times. Second, the teleportation magic would send the wearer from the mansion to the plaza, and for now, her father could use it as many times as he wanted. Aslan thanked Irita once again, saying it was a truly wonderful gift. He promised that he would treasure it. But just then, the heroine suddenly remembered something and asked whether he had not said he had invited someone else as well. They turned to look toward the gate and saw a young man standing there. He had a somewhat gloomy expression. The young man bowed and said to Aslan that it had been a long time. Afterward, they went together to the drawing room, where a small table with tea and refreshments was soon prepared. The atmosphere was clearly far from relaxed, and Irita thought that if she had known it would be like this, she should have simply gone back to her room. After studying the young man in front of her carefully, she gradually began to feel that his face seemed familiar. The man noticed the heroine's long, intent gaze and seemed to become flustered because of it, even meeting her eyes. He began fidgeting with his fingers, looking as though he wanted to ask something. He called the girl's name, which surprised her. She did not understand how he knew who she was. He seemed unable to get the words out properly. He had only managed to say, "I," before falling silent again at once. It looked as though he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Then he simply covered his face with his hand, seeming utterly dejected. Irita could not tell whether he had actually started crying, and she began to worry that perhaps she had said something rude. Aslan decided to speak first, saying that he was just the same as ever, always quick to cry. Irita was probably startled by that remark. Afterward, the man asked for forgiveness, saying that the tears had simply come out on their own. The Grand Duke told him to introduce himself, saying that he thought he ought to be ready by now. He asked Irita to forgive him, saying he had thought she might feel embarrassed because of him and his behavior. But the girl replied that it was fine. The young man bowed respectfully and said that his name was Cyan Vincent Landa. The heroine immediately realized that he was from the Duchy of Vincent. Irita was quite astonished when he then said that her mother was his sister. Cyan and Irita sat facing each other in the carriage, and neither of them spoke. The girl only looked out the window, unable to understand how things had ended up like this. Cyan Vincent was Selvia's younger brother. Irita had never heard that name before. There had been no such character at all in the original novel. Aslan apologized for not telling his daughter in advance. It had been far too long since he had last seen Cyan, and he had not even been sure whether he would truly come. Still, Irita tried to ease the mood, saying that it was all right. She had merely been surprised. After all, 14 years had passed, but new thoughts had also begun to surface in her mind. But the girl still was not sure how she ought to address this duke. After thinking for a moment, Aslan decided to offer her a suggestion under the circumstances. Irita accepted her father's proposal, yet she still did not know what she should say now. He suggested that she accompany Cyan, and while doing so, she could also take the opportunity to look around the imperial capital. They remained silent for a long time, though Cyan's expression no longer looked as gloomy as before. Suddenly, he apologized out of the blue, startling the girl as well. He apologized for not refusing the Grand Duke's suggestion. He had only wanted to get to know Irita a little better, but he had not realized it would burden her. He added that she probably needed some time to prepare herself too. She understood that her father had made that suggestion so that Cyan would be able to agree. Compared to that, the way she had spoken to her father a moment ago had truly been rude. Irita said she was very sorry. She simply had not thought of that earlier. But Cyan immediately told her not to apologize, saying that was not what he had meant at all. Irita suddenly held out her hand in front of the young man and spoke first. "Could you come see me 3 more times?" she asked in a slightly impolite tone, raising a hand with 3 fingers held up before him. Having never met any of her other relatives, the girl had felt awkward throughout the entire encounter. She asked Cyan if he could give her a little more time to get to know him. She added that after they had met 3 more times, she would be able to call him uncle. Tears of joy welled up in his eyes, and he thanked the girl. After seeing Cyan off, Irita sat in the cafe. As expected, the desserts here really were the best. But just then, she sensed something strange from the corner of her eye and turned to look. A young man was standing outside the window, waving cheerfully at her. Before long, the two of them were seated together at the same table in the cafe, and Irita said she had not expected to see him here. The young man replied that he had been looking forward to meeting the heroine, and he kept calling her magician. Her expression changed at once, and she immediately recalled that earlier encounter when she had failed to catch up to him. It seemed that the person around the corner back then had not been Leon. That was what the girl thought. The man back then had clearly been unwell or injured, but Leon now looked perfectly fine. He reminded Irita that he had asked her for something last time and asked whether she still remembered. Of course she remembered. Last time, she had not told that man her name. Lowering her head, she wondered if that was what he meant. Then the girl asked whether she could call him Mr. Leon. He replied that she could call him whatever she liked, and that he was glad she had not forgotten that request. But how could she possibly have forgotten? Meeting Leon was the most unusual part of Irita's everyday life. She had never even imagined they would meet again, yet now she said her own name without hesitation. Irita. Leon praised it, saying it was a very beautiful name. She decided to return the compliment by praising his name as well, but then she noticed a trace of confusion appear on his face. Seeing that expression, the girl herself froze, unsure what to say next. She thought that perhaps he did not like his own name. Deciding to change the subject, the girl asked why he had come to this place. He answered that he used to come here often and was very fond of this cafe, though today was his first visit since returning to the imperial capital. He also said that his mother was very fond of the desserts served here. Irita wanted to ask him something, but she could never quite bring herself to do it in that atmosphere. She nervously traced the rim of her cup with her fingers, and then he spoke. He thanked her mother for giving them the chance to meet again. Hearing that, Leon smiled and said she was right. Today, he really ought to thank his mother for allowing him to see her here. He reached out toward Irita and gently took hold of her wrist. Leon carefully asked the girl what she planned to do next, and whether she had any time free after leaving the cafe. In a slightly trembling voice, he asked if he could borrow a little of her time. The question immediately brought a faint blush to the girl's cheeks, and her heart began to pound so fast it frightened her. "Our meeting must be fate," the young man said as they walked. By then, they had arrived at the place Leon had wanted to go. He truly hoped the girl would like it here. She was genuinely stunned by the sight before her. From there, one could overlook the entire imperial capital, and Leon had wanted to bring Irita to see this place. The girl thanked him for bringing her to such a beautiful view. But suddenly, something else caught the heroine's attention. It was a very old tree with an extraordinarily thick trunk. Leon said he had heard that the tree had stood there for more than 300 years. That surprised Irita greatly. He added that there was a story connected to it and asked whether she would like to hear it. Leon said he had heard the tale from his mother, so he was not sure whether it was true or not. He lifted his gaze to the very top of the enormous tree. 300 years ago, according to legend, the tears of the sun god fell upon the place where this tree grew. On the night the destruction of the black magician was declared, a beam of white light descended here. The tree that sprouted at first was very small. It was astonishingly white, and at night it looked as though it were giving off light. A tree born from the tears of the sun god certainly sounded like a myth, but at the same time, it was very romantic. On the way back, Irita said that she had truly enjoyed spending the day with Leon like this, and he responded that he felt the same. But now it was time for them to part, though the two of them still decided to remain standing there a little longer. "When can we meet again?" the young man asked. Irita tightly clasped her hands in surprise because she did not know how to answer. She still could not make any promises because there were still secrets between them. But just then, an interesting thought came into her mind, and she wanted to say it aloud. If a coincidence happened 3 times, then it was already fate. So Leon promised that they would definitely meet again, though he still could not say when it would be. In the Baron's office, he sat quietly handling paperwork. Suddenly, some sound from outside distracted him. It seemed someone was about to enter his room. "Your Highness," that was what the person who entered said. The one who had come was Leon. The man immediately sprang to his feet and began shouting about why it had taken so long. Leon, however, paid no mind. Calmly, he asked how the man had been and added that the uniform suited him very well. The man was furious that Leon had arrived 2 hours late and was still so composed, but the young man replied that there had been a reason for it. "Did something good happen at the Intelligence Guild?" Leon asked. The other man said he had not managed to gather much information. But Leon did not believe him, because the man was smiling far too happily. He had never seen him look like that before. As if something had just occurred to him, the man seemed about to say something, but in the end he only replied that he had suddenly gotten a headache and forgotten what he had been going to say. It seemed the time he had spent with Irita had been even more wonderful than he had imagined. A voice from outside urged them to come to dinner, but there was no more time. Leon's formal uniform had already been prepared, and he needed to change quickly. His older brother would be arriving soon. That news made the young man feel slightly disappointed. His Highness the Second Prince has arrived. Upon hearing the announcement, he immediately turned toward his older brother and said it had been a long time, though he did not seem particularly pleased by the meeting. They exchanged only a few simple greetings, saying that it was good that both of them were well. "You know, I'm always worried about you," his older brother said. To that, Kilian gave the same reply in return. It was a sickening conversation, false and affected. Meanwhile, Irita was sitting in her room, fully absorbed in extremely delicate work. One wrong move, and all her efforts could be wasted. She could not allow all that work to come to nothing, so she focused with utmost care. Yuljin had given her the diamonds needed to make the divine artifact, though when he handed them over, he had sounded somewhat displeased and asked what exactly she intended to do with so many diamonds. But layering 5 levels of magic onto such a small gem was not easy. Even though diamonds were extremely hard, Irita still had to be especially careful. Suddenly, the stone lit up, and the heroine gave a small jump in surprise and delight. The 4th layer was completed successfully as well. Now only the final layer remained. Not wanting to rush, she decided to stop there for today and set the work aside for the moment. Just then, Mary entered the room and said she had brought some refreshments. Irita was very pleased to hear that, because she had just happened to be taking a break. The maid told her that the Grand Duke had bought the sweets on his way back. That made the girl even happier, because they were from Irita's favorite cafe in the imperial capital. As she enjoyed the delicious sweets, she recalled that Leon had also said this was his favorite cafe, and that he loved their desserts. Thinking about it carefully, Leon's attitude toward her at that time had been as though nothing had happened at all. As the heroine thought about it, the more she ate, the more convinced she became that he really was the man from the alley. She just could not understand why he had run away. Irita decided that next time, she would definitely ask him about that encounter. Mary noticed that, for some reason, the girl's expression had grown tinged with sadness and asked whether she did not like the sweets. Irita replied that everything was fine. She had simply been thinking of a friend. Mary's interest was piqued at once. Irita began describing the situation as though it had nothing to do with her at all. She said that this friend of hers had met someone several times. They knew each other's names and had even gone on walks together. Then one day, she went to the square and saw that man. But he vanished as if he had evaporated on the spot, even though she was sure their eyes had met. With a smile, Irita looked at the maid and asked what she thought of it. Mary immediately understood what was going on and asked, "The person you met was a man, wasn't he?" Before Irita could answer, the woman started shouting and grumbling, saying that one absolutely must not get involved with that sort of man. The The girl tried to calm the maid, saying that this story certainly was not about her. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Smiling, Irita gave permission for the visitor to enter. It seemed that even Mary's reaction had amused her. The newcomer informed the heroine that the Grand Duke was looking for her. When she entered her father's study, he handed her a letter and said it had come from the Marquis. He then added that the other party had specifically asked the Grand Duke to place it directly into Irita's hands. He also said that he had liked the gift the girl had given him very much. However, since that last visit, she had met Killian 2 more times. Once, Killian had come to see her himself, and the other time, Irita had gone to see him. And when she went to see him, she had given him a scarf embroidered by her own hand. She knew that more than anything else, he would prefer a gift made personally by her. She was happy with such a response. It had truly been a good choice. But the Grand Duke had also brought back a gift that Killian had sent to Irita. The heroine was so surprised that she immediately began unwrapping it, wanting to see what was inside. When she saw the contents of the elegant box, her eyes widened even further because inside was a pair of extraordinarily beautiful earrings. They must have cost a fortune. She immediately took the contents and showed them to her father, praising how beautiful the gift was. The Grand Duke felt a little regretful that Killian had not been able to witness her reaction in person. Still, no matter what, seeing his daughter smile was enough to make him happy. Irita decided that she had to write back at once and thank him immediately for the beautiful gift. The blond man strode quickly towards somewhere, simmering with resentment as he cursed Killian all the way. He was on his way to have a serious talk with his mother. Mother and son sat down at a table in a beautiful garden, preparing to have some tea before they talked. Theseus, the woman called his name, while he sat across from her in a thoroughly foul mood. His mother told him that it seemed His Majesty would announce the next crown prince at the upcoming ball, and Theseus's eyes widened when he heard that. But according to imperial history, the proclamation appointing the crown prince was supposed to take place on the empire's foundation day. The Empress looked at her son darkly and said only one word, "Prince." Theseus lowered his head sorrowfully, sweat beginning to slide down his face. He answered her, too, with only a single word, "Forgive me." She knew very well that the emperor would never let her beloved son ascend to that position so easily. But she knew one thing for certain. That place had to belong to him, and she promised that she would seize it for him. She reached out to touch his face and drew him toward her, telling him that he had nothing to worry about because he was the son she cherished most. If for some reason he tried to shrink away from her, at that moment, her expression became especially sinister as she vowed that Gila's son would never be allowed to steal the place that belonged to him. "Yes, I understand," Theseus answered once more in a gloomy voice, lowering his head. He had nothing else to say and could not refute his mother. "It's finally finished." Irita happily held in her hands the divine artifact she had made herself. It had truly taken a great deal of effort. She had originally worried that she would not finish it in time for the ball, but not only had she completed it in time, Yuljin had also turned it into a very beautiful pocket watch. In 3 days, the original story would begin. The heroine was deeply uneasy about it, but she was ready. Considering how distorted the situation had already become, what came next would probably be completely impossible to predict. Irita had clearly prepared everything with the utmost care, yet she could not understand why she was so nervous. All the girl could do was hope that everything she had prepared would prove useful. Mary had said that the festival would begin today. Irita was still standing on the balcony. She wanted to sort out her tangled thoughts and calm herself down. By evening, she decided to go outside for some fresh air. The festival was even larger in scale than she had imagined, and the streets were packed with people. The girl decided to walk a little farther away to watch the fireworks, and she also had to cover her hair color so she would not stand out too much in the crowd. Several boys rushing past her accidentally bumped into her. They were hurrying to get closer to the fireworks so they could claim a good spot, and Irita lost her balance as a result, crashing straight into a passerby. He immediately asked if she was all right. The moment the girl looked up, she recognized Leon. Even though she had disguised herself, he had still recognized her. She truly could not understand how he had done it, especially in such a crowded place. The young man soon gave her the answer. He had recognized her by her eyes. The two of them fell silent for a moment. Those words, along with this sudden reunion, left the girl feeling rather flustered. At the same time, the fireworks had already begun, and Irita quickly turned to admire the beautiful sight. Everyone around them was immersed in the joy of the moment, quietly watching, when Irita suddenly seemed to think of something. She turned to Mr. Leon and asked whether this was enough. All she did was snap her fingers, and the fireworks instantly became 10 times grander. The entire night, sky lit up with dazzling colors. The people around them could hardly believe their eyes. They kept asking one another if they had really seen that, and marveled that this year's festival was far more spectacular than usual. Leon sighed that Irita was as kind as ever, then lowered his head awkwardly, embarrassed by his own words. Ever since that day, nothing had changed. He still held that bracelet in his hand, the lucky bracelet she had given Killian when they first met. Back then, she had said that perhaps it was only superstition, but that if he wore the bracelet, it would surely bring him good luck. And now, they simply stood side by side, admiring the view before them together. Irita had not even realized that she had known this man for a very long time. He could not put it off any longer. Today, he wanted to tell her everything. He had to confess his true identity. Turning to Irita, he said that there was something he absolutely had to tell her today. Those words startled the girl. He hesitated for a long time, unsure how to begin, but just then the passers-by and everyone else at the festival began whispering among themselves, quietly speaking Irita's name. They said that Miss Crovaharts seemed to be nearby. The girl quickly insisted they had mistaken her for someone else, and the two of them immediately decided to leave the crowd's line of sight first. But Irita suddenly called out to stop him. She had noticed something, saying that he had dropped something. The girl quickly bent down to pick it up. In truth, it was a bracelet that would make her understand everything at once. The young man's expression changed instantly. He was afraid because he had originally intended to tell her everything himself, and he had no idea how she would take this truth now. At that moment, the bracelet was already in Irita's hand. If she became angry because Killian had deceived her by pretending to be someone else, that would hardly be strange. Irita recognized it immediately. It was the very bracelet she had given a male lead on the day of the Queen's funeral. She looked up at Leon and, for a moment, did not know what to say to him. Her hands and feet began trembling on their own. She could not understand how she had failed to recognize those blue eyes. After all, she had seen those eyes when she was a child. Eyes exactly like the male leads. Only then did Irita remember that every time they met, he had called her magician, which meant he had known everything from the very beginning. The female lead immediately turned around, preparing to leave. Before going, all she did was apologize for her rudeness. Leon tried to stop her. He reached out and was just about to catch the girl, but she suddenly vanished, leaving only a few magical afterimages before his eyes. For a while, he simply stood in the middle of the street, trying to process everything that had just happened. The young man felt both pained and dejected, because things had turned out like this of all ways. He slammed his fist into the wall with all his strength. He regretted it, and this was not the ending he had wanted. After all, he had been planning to tell her in person today. The truth was that he was Killian Ruin-Elvel, and they had already met long ago. He had even rehearsed that conversation in his head. He had wanted to say, "Forgive me for hiding my identity from you all this time." Now, he felt that the female lead probably would not forgive this deception. He had had a chance to tell her the truth, yet he had never been able to force himself to speak. If he had known things would turn out this way, he should have told her sooner. Killian comforted himself by thinking that it was not over yet. He would still have another chance. In 3 days, he had to explain everything clearly to Irita. The next morning, Irita sat at the breakfast table, but there was only one thing on her mind. Leon was actually Killian. She ran her fingers over his bracelet, or more precisely, the lucky bracelet she had given away. She had never expected to meet him again. Killian had known who Irita was from the very beginning, but if not for this bracelet, she never would have recognized him. The girl could not understand why he had hidden his identity and deliberately approached her. Perhaps he had wanted to gather some information from Irita, but in truth they had never discussed anything important. No matter what, the girl was still deeply hurt. How could someone deceive another person like that? Irita had originally thought he was a good man, so she tried to drive all thoughts of him from her mind. They had never been that close to begin with, so she ought to stop feeling as though she had been betrayed. But if she was being honest, Leon had always been a pleasant person to talk to, and she had long sensed that he seemed to be hiding something. She decided that the next time they met, she would pretend it was their first meeting. That should be enough. And so, the day of the ball arrived. The weather outside was bright and pleasant, and the entire castle was bathed in sunlight. Irita was ready. The dress fit her perfectly, but she still worried a little that perhaps she had gone overboard with her appearance. Just then, she suddenly heard a familiar voice say that she had been so tiny when she was first born. When she looked up, her father was standing before her. His face was full of smiles, because his daughter looked especially beautiful today, while he himself was no less distinguished than usual. Once again, he marveled at how much Irita had grown and said he was incredibly proud of her. Island was already waiting for them at the door, and Aslan suggested that the three of them enter the hall together. At that moment, the three of them stood before the doors, preparing to go in. From the instant Irita crossed the threshold, it felt as if the curtain had officially risen on the original story. The girl clung tightly to her father's arm. That made her feel much more at ease. And once the original story began, Ella would appear as well. Fate would bring her and Killian together, and the two of them would fall in love. Irita knew that she absolutely could not lose her composure, nor could she make any mistakes. She had to remain clear-headed at all times. Before they entered, her father also reminded her not to forget that both he and Island would always be there and would always stand on her side. The female lead felt immeasurably grateful for such words from her family and for their unwavering support. It was because of those two that she truly felt happy. No matter what happened, she swore to herself that she would keep protecting them. Then they walked into the hall, where the guests were already being announced. His Grace Aslan Crovahearts of the Grand Duchy of Crovahearts, young Master Island Crovahearts, and Lady Irita Crovahearts. The moment the three of them came to a stop, someone immediately approached them to offer greetings. Among them was Cyan, whom they had not expected to see here. He said that since this was probably Irita's first formal public appearance, he had to come help no matter what. He asked the girl whether she was nervous, and Irita replied that everything was fine, though she had thought she would be more nervous. But in reality, she was worried about something else, and she still could not say it out loud. She had to use the divine artifact to determine what kind of dark magic the queen had used, but if she wanted to use the artifact on the queen, she had to get within at least 5 steps of her. She had to find a way to get closer. There was less than a week left before the deadline, and aside from this banquet, Irita would have no other chance to approach her alone. The girl heard the announcement for the next guest begin to ring out. Her Majesty Empress Aisha Rainison, the radiant sovereign and most exalted lady of the Empire, and His Highness Theseus Ruinelval, first prince of the Empire. That announcement made our female lead tense up even more at once. The Queen and Theseus, she began to feel afraid. The faces she had been unable to forget for 8 years now seemed to be forcing her to lift her head and face them directly. The Queen began her address, and just then he entered the hall, His Highness the Second Prince, Killian Ruinelval. Of course, there was no way Irita could keep herself from looking at him. It really was him, Killian, the very same man she was more used to calling Mr. Leon. But they merely passed by one another, both pretending not to know the other at all. The ball began. Gentlemen began inviting ladies to dance. Everything looked so splendid and solemn. Irita turned to her brother and asked him to stay with her for a while. Naturally, he would never refuse his sister. Island gave a bow and extended his hand to her. It was an invitation to dance. Irita immediately felt much more at ease because she had someone she loved by her side. While they danced, he also mentioned that her dancing had improved a great deal compared with before, probably thanks to the fact that Island practiced with her from time to time. But even while dancing, Irita could not take her eyes off Killian, and yet his expression was so cold. The man she saw now seemed like a completely different person. The Killian the female lead knew had clearly been a gentle and kind man. Those thoughts kept the female lead from calming down, but she had to remember that her task right now was not here. Even so, she could not help thinking that perhaps this was his true self. Perhaps the Killian she had known had been nothing more than a mask. Irita tried her best to act as though she did not care, but that was not so easy. Island naturally noticed that the girl was distracted and asked what was wrong, but this time she could not answer her brother. Still, she also noticed that their father was staring straight at them with an intensely oppressive gaze. So, she joked that Island's back was probably about to burn from being stared at like that. The young man smiled and replied that he felt exactly like a villain who had abducted a princess. But after he won that duel, Irita asked him whether he was planning to bear everything alone again this time. After all, being responsible for his little sister's social debut was not such a terrible price to pay. That was how he answered. Later that night, the girl stepped out onto the balcony for some air. She needed to sort through the thoughts in her head as well. She had danced only 3 times, yet she already felt utterly exhausted. After all, she had even shared a dance with Cyan. Dancing truly was hard work. Looking into the distance, Irita thought that the masquerade would be held 3 days later. If she wanted to secretly approach the queen, that would be the best opportunity. On that day, the palace would be more crowded than ever. Masks could hide her face, but what should she do about her hair? Irita wondered. Using magic would be too dangerous. If anyone saw her casting a spell, it would be a problem. She needed to think it through a little more, but just then, someone suddenly called out to her. It was Tane, the very wolf beastman himself. Irita was quite surprised to see him here and immediately asked how he had gotten in. He told her to wait a moment, then suddenly darted behind the corner as though hiding from someone. But the very next second, he was already on the balcony beside Irita. She had not even managed to see how he got there, and was still looking down below for him. Tane said that he had not noticed a single person on his way here, so there was nothing to worry about. He then added that, at the very least, there was no one within his field of vision. Since Tane said it so confidently, it was probably true. Pure-blood werewolves naturally possessed extraordinary abilities. But the female lead still did not understand why he had come here. It turned out that Yuljin had urgently asked him to deliver something to the girl. He had also said that as soon as his name was mentioned, Irita would understand everything at once. So the girl lowered her gaze to the stack of documents placed in her hands. Written, there was something unbelievable. There was no such person as Ella Dean. Baron Dean and his wife had only one son, named Eli Dean. They had no other children. Irita was completely shocked. Had Ella really disappeared? The ball was still going on, and the atmosphere was lively. The queen and her son sat in their elevated seats as expected, carefully observing everything below. Irita had already returned to the others and rejoined her brother, and the two of them exchanged smiles. But just then, she felt a gaze settle on her, so familiar, so gentle, as if it had locked onto her from head to toe. A false name, a false identity. He knew perfectly well that one day Irita would learn the truth, and yet he still gave in to the sweet temptation before him. He had foolishly believed he could keep himself under control, and he could not have been more wrong. More than anything now, he wanted to run to her at once and tell her everything. But he had no such chance now, because if he did, the Empress would immediately notice everything. Helion knew he had to find a place where no one could overhear them and speak to the young lady there. On the surface, he had no connection whatsoever to the Grand Duke's daughter. He only hoped she could stay far away from this filthy struggle, somewhere clean and safe. Sitting alone in her room, Irita hoped Yuljin had not gone to sleep yet. There was something she urgently needed to clarify. The heroine had vanished without a trace. What on earth had happened? The search for Ella Dean had originally been going smoothly, and Yuljin had even said he would be able to meet her soon. If only this were nothing more than some mistake on Yuljin's part. Fortunately, Irita had a special magic orb through which she could contact him. At last, Yuljin's image appeared before her, and he called Irita's name. She immediately apologized for disturbing him so late at night, but he had actually been waiting for this call and had not gone to bed. He said he had been about to ask her about Ella Dean. He asked the heroine who that was supposed to be. He had found the name in a notebook where he recorded important commissions, yet he had no memory of her at all. Irita could hardly believe it. Yuljin, who had only recently been searching for Ella, had somehow forgotten her existence entirely. Even Irita knew that, logically speaking, it was impossible. If Yuljin had not written the matter down, he might have simply overlooked it and moved on. But after seeing the record, he still sent the report to her. And yet, no matter how hard he tried to remember anything about Ella Dean, his mind remained completely blank. He did not remember who she was, nor did he remember why Irita had asked him to find her. Astonishingly, Yuljin truly could not recall even the smallest detail. For a moment, only silence remained between them. Irita merely stared at him, utterly unable to comprehend any of it. Then the man spoke. He said he knew she had been hiding something all this time, pretending that everything was fine. But in reality, she was carrying a heavy burden, so he wanted to ask whether she distrusted him that much. He had thought he could at least help shoulder some of Irita's burden, but he quickly apologized and told her to forget what he had just said. It seemed he was simply too tired, which was why he had become a little irritable. He also said he would conduct a separate investigation, then bid her good night. But Irita remained sitting there for quite some time, unmoving, lost in her thoughts. She wondered how she should confess it, how she should explain that she was not the real Irita Crovahearts at all, and that this world itself was nothing more than a story inside a book. But she loved this family she had gained in her second life far too much. She only wanted to save them. She knew very well that it would never be easy, but even she had never imagined that it would be this terrifying, this lonely. She was so afraid. She did not understand what was happening, and she could not stop the tears that streamed endlessly from her eyes like a flowing brook, breaking even her train of thought. She even began to feel that Ilda's disappearance was also her fault, which left her even more restless. All of these fears seemed to remind her that, in the end, she was an outsider here. The girl fell asleep, crying over her desk. Her father and Island saw her like that, and he had told her so many times not to carry everything alone. Carefully, he gathered his daughter into his arms and carried her toward the bed. If things had already reached this point, then he knew all too well how much pain she must be in. Aslan pulled the blanket up over her, gently stroked her face, and wished his child sweet dreams. Island asked what their father planned to do next, and Aslan replied that since Irita did not want them to know, they had no choice. But they knew everything Irita had been doing. They knew about her connection to the Ragras Guild, and they knew she was researching dark magic. They knew that the reason for all of it lay in the secret she was hiding. Irita, what exactly are you concealing? The question kept circling in her brother's mind as he stood there staring at the sleeping girl. He only wanted to help her. And there was also the figure that had once appeared beside the tree on the mountain, the one Leona had mentioned. The outline of that woman slowly approached Irita, placed a hand on her head, and stroked her gently. "My dear child," she said, "I'm sorry for making you bear all of this." "I'm truly sorry," she said, and then she disappeared.